everybody. Thank you for coming a little bit earlier today. Much appreciated. Welcome councillors, officers and members of the public to the meeting of the Planning Committee. Reminder, please switch your mobile phones off or to silent. There are members of the public press attending to this meeting virtually. Can I ask those attending to switch off your microphone to avoid disruption during the meeting? The meeting is being recorded and will be available in due course on the council's YouTube channel. We have toilets either in the building. There's no fire alarm planned, therefore if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building immediately by the nearest exit and gather at the assembly point, which is located in the car park to the side of the main entrance. Members of the public who have registered to speak will be invited to use the microphone to address the committee and will have up to 3 minutes. To ensure that those attending virtually can hear the proceedings and for the recording to capture the entire meeting, please ensure that you wait for the microphone and speak clearly into the microphone. Please remember it's a formal meeting and therefore do not refer to councillors or officers by their first names. My name is Kevin Davies, and before we come to the agenda, I would ask our officers to introduce themselves from my left, please.
Jenny Leakins, lead officer for major development.
Morning, Tracy Blackwell, planning manager at North Devon Council.
Morning, Beverly Triggs, clerk to the meeting. Morning, Carol Norman, legal officer.
Good morning, Steve Embry, senior planning officer, North Team.
Morning, Chris Heapley, leader of the South Team.
Morning, Paul Young, Devon County Council Highways.
Okay, thank you very much. That brings us to the agenda. Item 1, do we have apologies for absence, please?
I've received none, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2, to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of February 2026. I have a mover, please. Sure. Secondly by Booth. All in favour? In favour of minutes? Abstentions? And against? That's carried, thank you. Items brought forward, which in the opinion of the chair should be considered by the meeting as a matter of urgency. Ken Miles sent an email out yesterday giving everyone an update on the patch hole situation. Elaborate any further, that came out to you yesterday, I believe. In terms of White Cross, there is now a hearing date of the 24th of April. The judicial review was refused permission, so the hearing is to challenge that, if I'm correct, Carol. Item 4, declarations of interest. We have a few.
Yes, Chair, I received the following declaration of interest. Councillor Caroline Lever has declared for just transparency reasons an interest in application 80058. Councillor Davies has declared a disclosure of pecuniary interest in application 81205. And Councillor Lane has declared a non-registrable interest in application 80058, Chair.
Thank you. Item 5, to agree the agenda between Part A and Part B. Sorry, Councillor Lever.
So for transparency, I thought it might be helpful to explain.
Yeah, if I can ask Triggs to read out that reason, or did you want to elaborate?
If I
Please
could,
elaborate,
I'd be most
Councillor.
grateful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have, just for the reasons of transparency, I thought it'd be helpful for the committee and for others to understand where I am on this previously. My husband's company did some work on this application, but that company has ceased to exist. There is no possible opportunity for any kind of benefit or interest or anything in this application, whether brings further the application, irrespective of what the the result of today's deliberations are. And I've checked this with the monitoring officer and the legal officer, and all are happy, but I wanted to make it absolutely clear the reason I'm here is because we have no possible future, or indeed current interest or way of benefiting from it. So just for transparency's purposes, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, councillor Lever. Item 5, to agree the agenda between part A and part B. We do not have a part B. So we move to part A, item 6, application 80058 and at Brinsworthy. And I will pass over to Jenny Meekins for our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to start with a couple of just updates in relation to the report and some things that have sort of happened since the report was published. First, I just want to highlight some typographical errors in the report. On page 24, there is a slight typo. It should say compliant instead of complaint in talking in relation to 30% affordable housing being provided on the site. And then in paragraphs 5.44, it should say ecological rather than psychological. And 5.45 should say deciduous instead of situations. What those are. And just in terms of additional representation, since the report was published, we've had a further 3 objections since the report was published. Having reviewed those, it doesn't raise any new issues that aren't already listed in the summary within the planning committee report.
The typo 6.7.
Oh, a 6.7. There's also a typo. It says the word to when it should say the word no, in reference to detailed comments coming from DCC Highways. And then covering off some of the other sort of technical matters that have arisen in the last week and a half. We met yesterday with DCC Highways just to sort of catch up on the application. We have got the DCC Highways officer here, Paul Young, today as well. It had been raised a point in relation to safe walking routes to the primary school, which is Roundswell Primary Academy, which would be the catchment for this site. The road safety officer for the area had reviewed that route. And I don't know if some of you may be able to cast your mind back to a planning application we had for 220 homes on Old Bideford Road earlier this year, where we secured some off-site highway works on the junction with Old Bideford Road and Shoes Lane, where at the moment there's a mini roundabout, and on one arm of that roundabout there's no crossing point and no footway. So the Old Bideford Road scheme secured those works, but obviously in the event that doesn't come forward, we would need this scheme also to provide similar works, because the onward travel for children from this site would be through Glenwood Park, across that piece of Old Bideford Road and onwards down through Chews Lane. I put that position obviously to the developer, and they are happy for us to deal with that with a sort of further off-site highway works condition, which would require submission of a scheme, and that scheme to be implemented so that it means there's that meaningful and safe and well-designed walking route north to the primary school. And then the final thing which has been ongoing, which you will come across, may have come across in the report, is in relation to NHS contributions and the acute care contributions. So that's contributions that go directly to hospital provision and hospital services rather than GP practices, which we term as primary care. We have been in ongoing dialogue with the NHS for quite a long period of time in relation to whether their contributions that they request are justified in terms of the civil regulations. So are they reasonably related in scale and kind to the development to which they're being sought on? There was a piece of planning case law in Leicestershire where this was challenged, and since then, the way we receive comments from the NHS doesn't really fill us with confidence that they could meet that CILREG test. We've had some quite productive conversations with them in the last week and a half, and they have provided us with some more information. We've still got to discuss that information with colleagues at Torridge, and whether it does the job essentially. But in the interim, I have discussed this with the developer, and have agreed to pay the NHS contribution that is stipulated in the report, in the table at section 9, which is a amount, I think it's about 398,000 towards NHS acute care. Obviously, if there is any issue with the the way the NHS has presented their new calculation and the projects they've demonstrated to us, it's something we will bring to the fore. But the developer has said they'll agree to it for the section 106 agreement, and there are mechanisms post decision that they can they can address that with us if necessary, and obviously let things may come back to committee if we receive an application of that kind. So moving on to the main event. So the application is made an outline to secure access as a reserve matters as part of this application, with matters of appearance, landscape, layout, and scale reserved for future applications. It includes up to 450 dwellings, a local centre which includes both community and retail convenience space, and obviously all the associated infrastructure you would expect to see on a large scale development of this kind. So the site lies to the south of the A39. Proposals would include an access coming off the A39. You've got a kind of a lowland level part of the site there, which lies adjacent to the main road. There's a section of the red line, which you can see here, which extends to the north of the A39, which is key for providing infrastructure links onto the facilities to the north, and similarly there's a little red line there that extends to the footpath that comes off the pedestrian bridge at Roundswell, again giving that common onward connectivity for walking and cycling to the east, and then the larger part of the site, which slopes upwards, obviously extends further south along the farmland that's located there. So to put it into context, obviously I know a lot of you have also visited this site. I think we've been there twice over the last 2.5 years. Again, you've got sort of large agricultural fields and then some smaller scale fields to the north, and then there are some pockets of woodland also located in that northern area. Just to put that into context of an overall kind of land use plan and how much of the site is developable and how much is left to green infrastructure, blue infrastructure, and other infrastructure associated with the development. So your beige parcels of land there are your developable areas that they will be anticipated to be pockets of residential use. Then you've got the sort of purple square in the spurs of the sort of larger agricultural fields to the south. That is the community and retail area. Then the pockets obviously of blue and green are your drainage ponds, attenuation ponds, and sort of areas that are retained as green infrastructure, green open space from there. And then the dotted lines obviously are the sort of key connectivity across those areas. And then just to put that into a little bit more detail, see this is concept layout plan, so it's indicative at this stage. This doesn't sort of fix the layout, but it gives you an idea based on the constraints of the site where you would expect development to be located across the site. And then just another, this will be a point of interest. That gives you just an idea of the detailed junction design for the access of the site onto the A39. So it's a junction arrangement with traffic lights coming into the site there, and then there will be onwards to the north only a pedestrian and cycle link. There would be no sort of road or anything like that northern area. So I just put this together. This is a drone video of the site. This is drone going up towards the southern part of the site, adjacent to the waste transfer sort of station that's located at the top of the hill next to Brinslow Area Environment Centre. Then heading northwards. So these two sort of pasture fields you can see here with the hedgerow down the middle are both part of the application site. The trees and the woodland around it aren't in this particular location. So as you pan round, you can see to the north there, you can't see the A39 in between the sort of tree cover, but that is the sort of development at Roundswell and Glenwood Park that you can see sort of there in the foreground of the drone footage. This is just spinning round to just right outside to put into context. You've got Brinsworth, the Environment Centre there, the industrial units and the waste transfer site. It's that large building there. The site boundary obviously extends right up to the road past Brinsworthy at the top, but there is no vehicle access out onto that road to the south, which is the pedestrian connection. And a lot of this land at the higher topographical level is left as public open space, green space, and isn't actually populated with dwellings on this sort of the ridgeline area of the site. Just shows you the wider contextual views to the south. And looking along the sort of northern boundary, so you've got the A39 running along there and Glenwood Park to the north. This area, as we sort of move across, the area of trees that you can see here is where the access road would be entering the site. The site extends across into the next field. You can see there sort of half grassland with some storage there, and then across further to the east along there, where it would connect into the county-owned land, where the pedestrian bridge comes over to the site owned by the county. But the site extends to the land boundary with the county council owned land. Just pan around there, lots of the wider Roundswell development there. And as when I refer to the pinch point where the access comes throughout my presentation, this is this area here that I'm talking about, between this little piece of woodland that's outside of the application site and coming into this more southern field. So moving on to the sort of planning considerations relating to this site, and what you'll see at the bottom, in terms of each slide, there'll be sort of subject areas where I've put RR1 or RR2 next. That refers to the refusal reasons on the previous application. So in my committee report, you'll see I listed 6 refusal reasons from the previous planning application when it was considered by committee, and each of the sort of sections of the slides as we go through the rest of the presentation will make reference back to that. So starting with the location of the site and its relationship with the development boundary for Barnstaple. So you see the solid black line sort of runs along the northern side of the A39 on this plan. This is a plan out of the North Devon and Torridge local plan. This is our land, basically our land allocation plans within the local plan. And you'll see there's a pink area to the north there, which is residential development that's developed out under allocation of a BAR 09, which is complete. Most of those allocations on that northern side of the A39 have been complete for at least sort of the last 3 or 4 years. The red line boundary, as you can see, partially extends into the development boundary area, but the majority of it lies to the south of that. When you previously considered this application at committee, we were able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. Today, we cannot. Sort of quite a fundamental difference in position into how you look at those, particularly where we've drawn black lines around our settlements, i.e. when you've got no 5-year housing land supply, you have to apply the presumption in favour of sustainable development and look a little bit outside of the black line box on our development, development boundaries, and then consider sites based on their own merits and sustainability credentials. So that's quite a fundamental difference between this application and previous applications. And therefore we would be, applying the tilted balance in this case. So only in instances where we can sort of demonstrate significant and demonstrable harm would we be in a position that we would look to refuse an application. And as we walk through the application, you'll see where elements of, benefits and harm are identified and how we have reached the planning balance that we have in this case. So one of the key issues that came out of the previous application was the lack of connectivity that was demonstrable from the site to onward facilities. As you see, that covers refusal reason 2 and 5 in the earlier decision notice. One of the key issues that was raised was in relation to this northern area. So again, this is a zoomed in version of the land allocation plan. Now, originally, there was aspirations within the local plan to achieve a highway link as part of the AR09 allocation out onto the A39. To date, that hasn't been delivered. However, the last planning application for development on the AR09, the outline application secures this triangle of land in here with an option agreement to the county council to deliver infrastructure on in the future, basically. So there's been sort of fairly protracted discussions over the last few years about how we enable that connection to come forward in the context of this application. And there's been significant advances, obviously, in the discussions in that we now have the kind of written support of the county council in enabling that connection to be achieved, and they will, work alongside the developer to facilitate that. As well as being able to demonstrate that the conditions on a planning application would ensure that's secured before any development can take place at the site. So that's quite fundamental because every child who's going to be on the site is going to need to get to that northern side of the road to get to the school onward to the north, and you would have to have a safe and suitable and well-designed crossing point to enable that. The other aspect of connectivity is to look at what obviously land uses lie to the east of the site. The drone video here is slightly out of date now, if you like, because the area where you can see in the top corner there is also some additional industrial units have gone on to the site next to the node. Just in case anyone's not familiar, this is the node here. And industrial buildings have gone in this area here, and again, there they are there, and that's the node there. So again, the discussions that have taken place here is that the application red line boundary on this application is actually larger than the previous one because it now includes this little pocket of land in here, which is essential to provide that eastern connection onto the county-owned land. The developer's been in discussions with the property team at the county council, and there is an agreement that that connection can be made, again, subject to us having conditions in any planning application that ensure that connection is made at the correct time. It's also worth noting here as well that the proposals include a change in the arrangement with Brinsworthy Lane, and Brinsworthy Lane itself would be closed off eventually and rerouted through the site, subject to layout considerations, things like that. So there's a condition on the recommendation that deals with that aspect, as well as matters of layout would look at exactly how that arrangement worked, as well as the relevant highways agreements. And just to put into context, something that we've covered in quite a lot of detail at the previous planning committee are the distances involved to the various facilities. So a change in this, so the distances are still the same from those other aspects. Obviously, the connectivity is a lot, well, the connectivity can be guaranteed now. From previous application, we were unsure whether any connectivity could be guaranteed at all. But these are your kind of nearest distances. There's a table after this that will show you travel times, which is probably a little bit more useful. But it is worth noting at the bottom of this, there is a bus service to be proposed to be run from the site. There's a contribution in the table of planning obligations, which details contribution amount and or there is an option that the developer can run that directly with Stagecoach. The finer details of exactly when you would implement that, given you would need people actually living on the site to justify the viability of that, is something that would need to be sort of discussed in a bit more detail with the county council, but that's quite a big change again from the previous one. It's a sustainable travel option that would run from the site rather than anyone site needing to go over to the northern side of the A39 to pick up a bus stop there. And then again, that just gives you the similar distances, but it also gives you the rough times that it would take you to either walk or cycle. It's also worth noting here, obviously, I've included some of the nearest large-scale retail facilities and community facilities, but this site now includes a local centre. So it includes a small-scale retail facility, which we've capped at 350 square metres based upon the retail impact assessment that's been done, as well as other area for other community types of use. So again, that makes, you know, when that comes forward would mean that people wouldn't necessarily need to travel off the site just to pick up a few convenience goods, some extra milk, bread, things like that. You know, they could utilise that from the site. And then that's just, again, an overlay I think I presented in the previous committee, just to put into context where some of those facilities are. Do ignore the map extract. I can remove that's the earlier layout that doesn't include the land to the east, but it just gives you an indication obviously where the site is in relation to where I've highlighted those where those key services and facilities are. Obviously, the school being probably one of the key ones, because the site hasn't got school provision, and that is the nearest primary school to the site, and obviously taking note of where the other services and facilities in the Brownswell locality are. So moving along to landscape and visual impacts, I think it's fair to say with the development of this scale, sort of landscape and visual impacts are unavoidable. So, you know, the dialogue in the report goes through, you know, what the degree of those impacts are, and then those are impacts that need to be weighed in the planning balance with, you know, benefits versus harm in relation to proposals. This is a zone of visual influence drawing. This doesn't mean that you will see the development from everywhere. That's in the blue theoretical visibility. So that's a bare land. Theoretical visibility is done on the basis that you haven't got trees and features like that in the way. And what I have included here is one of the photo montages from the landscape and visual impact assessment, which basically shows you viewpoint today with the kind of greenfield cover of the land, and then a 12-year photo montage, which if I wave the mouse around, you can see that's the kind of the impact of development in the area. Again, cautionary approach with anything that's photo montage. They are designed to be viewed at a certain size, certain viewing distance, things like that. But for an indicative purpose, just to show you, you know, that there will be landscape change as a result of this development and how we've weighed that in the overall balance. So I'd say with this application, the previous application, that level of harm is the same because it's the same development, same scale, but you are looking at slightly different benefits balances. So when you put it in that sort of planning balance calculation, the result comes out slightly differently. So moving on to what was referenced as refusal reason 4 in the previous application, and something that is a matter of sort of significant weight and has been given sort of great importance in considering this application, is the amount of protected tree cover in relation to particularly where the site entrance and those lower parts of the site come in. So excuse me that there's no red line boundary around this area, but to put into context, basically this section of this TPO is in the site area, as is sort of parts of this bit over here where the red line boundary comes down here and then goes across into here where you'd get that eastward connectivity. There is also an area of woodland there, as you can see, which has been designated as ancient semi-natural woodland on the woodland inventory. That basically gives it sort of slightly higher level protections than a TPO, and that was put into place last October, so actually relatively new thing. So there's been quite a lot of work in the interim period. If I just show you, so if I refer to the site access area first, that's the sort of 2 areas where trees have been a quite significant consideration here. So you've got this first area here, TPO 332. This is where the site access would come in. So needless to say, there will be loss of quite a lot of trees in this area. But the tree survey work and negotiations that have taken place in the lifetime of the application have looked to, you know, how can we safeguard as much as possible? What will be replaced and mitigated for through BNG and the ecological mitigation strategy for this site, and how you protect those trees of the sort of the highest importance. And then I'll just leave you on that one. So in reference to this part of the site, there is there's what's been identified as veteran tree within the site. So they are, again, deemed to be sort of irreplaceable in terms of habitat. They're old. It takes a very, very long time to replace that level of habitat value by putting in a new tree. What the developer has done as part of the application is demonstrated that the guidance within the planning practice guidance in terms of the buffer areas which you should apply to these level of protected trees can be achieved. So the trees can be retained and protected even with the access road coming through that site. The secondary concern of our arboricultural officer as well was by losing some of the tree cover in this sort of initial area here where the site boundary runs along sort of this line here. You would leave trees to the south open to what's the wind throw. So they'd be flattened because they've benefited from protection of some of the more robust trees at the front in the past. A way we compromise, we've decided that we can effectively deal with that is basically to place a hit and miss fence along that boundary for a prescribed period, which we said would probably be a sort of 20-year period to allow the new planting that's going to be put in place to bolster that boundary to establish fully. So then actually the fence acts as the windrow protection to those trees to the south. And yeah, a condition would be imposed requiring that to be, you know, put in place before a certain stage and then removed after a certain stage, because it's not necessarily a piece of infrastructure you want there in the long term, but it serves a purpose of actually preserving the trees behind it from any damage in the interim while the trees in front established as part of the landscaping scheme. So moving on to the area of ancient woodland and what I've referred to as the pinch point, which is here in terms of access to the site. And that's just to show you where that is. Obviously, this was in reference to the access, apologies. Showing where it comes in and the trees that will be retained. I think it's this one here is the veteran tree with its circle shown being its root protection and the buffer zones imposed. So that's just to give you the overlay impression of how that works. It's just yeah, so that's that one there. So yeah, referring to the pinch point here, again, you've got the semi-ancient natural woodland. In the main, it sits out of the site in its entirety, but in the main, the root systems of any of the trees in there are either protected by a landscape buffer zone that's shown on the concept layout plans, or by using those buffer zones and root protection areas that are within the PPG. The only tree which the report refers to as having taken a precautionary approach towards is an oak tree that's located here, where at present its root system is kind of semi-exposed, it's in a stream, and it is in part covered by a stone access track. So its root system is already slightly compromised. In terms of obviously construction methods and things like that, it may be that mechanisms can be put in place with the buffer zone that's been identified to safeguard that tree, but taking that precautionary approach from a planning perspective, we've sort of given weight to the fact that it may not be fully protected and there may be impacts on that tree, and that's been weighed in the balance through the report. And then just to show you obviously where there's that other TPO on the eastern land, this shows you obviously where an access route will come through, and there will be some tree removals to enable that access route. But in the main, that sort of section of TPO that was on the very eastern part of the site, a lot of those trees are able to be retained in that little pocket of land there. So moving on to the flood zones, and obviously again what was a refusal reason in the earlier application in relation to failure of the sequential test. There has been a further policy shift since the earlier application was determined, and an update to the planning practice guidance, which updates how local planning authorities treat the sequential test. So this, in this instance, you know, the site there are sequentially preferable sites in Barnstaple with either planning permission or land allocations available where development can be delivered. However, the change to the PPG in September 25 basically says that even the failure to pass a sequential test isn't fatal to an application, with the government's acknowledging that they have got a house building target, but that must be weighed alongside the site-specific evidence that you can mitigate against any sort of flood impacts and provide safe access and egress for the site. It's fair to say, you'll see from the Environment Agency's comments, they don't raise any issues in terms of the technical design and treatment of the site. The sequential tests satisfy ourselves as the local planning authority that it can be passed or not, saying it can't be passed, but in this instance, with the shift to the planning practice guidance, because the design techniques that can be adopted for the site can include getting the correct finished floor levels, not that there are actually any dwellings within the flood zone. It is literally just that access at the pinch point I've referred to. You can raise the level of that out of the floodplain without too much difficulty, or put in an appropriate design solution that people will still be able to leave and enter the site in a flood event safely, and given that is satisfying that test of safe access and egress from the site. So essentially that shift in policy has dealt with that refusal reason. And then just referring on to what you'll have seen in the planning balance table, it wasn't a reason for refusal on the previous application, but it was highlighted as a matter that you weigh against public benefits of the proposal. So there are heritage assets in proximity to the site, some listed buildings, sort of highlighted in, those are ones that are highlighted in red near to the site. It's to do with the wider context of the site changing. The change of farmland, pasture land to residential development is a change to the overall wider setting of what are, listed buildings located in an open countryside setting. They're not immediately in the site, but they are near enough that we've given significant weight to that as a matter, and we've given it great weight of importance when we've considered the application. But when you apply the relevant paragraph of the National Planning Policy Framework that requires you to balance what's less, in this instance, less than substantial harm to the heritage asset against the public benefits of the proposal, you're looking at, your planning balance and what we've identified as those public benefits in terms of housing delivery, affordable housing, and some of the infrastructure and those sorts of matters. The balance in this instance would be that those public benefits would outweigh the less than substantial harm that's been identified. So again, moving on to this table, it looks very boring. I'm sorry if the writing is a bit small, but it's quite long. It's quite a lot in terms of planning obligations. And these are matters that, in physical layout of development on the ground, you don't necessarily see, but they are things that I'm sure members of the public are commonly raising as infrastructure issues in the area. So as you can see, the application would secure both acute care and primary care contributions. Your affordable housing is being provided on site with your normal, minimum of 75% social rent, 25% in intermediate rate mix. The exact housing mix across the site, because it's a sort of large outline scheme, isn't fixed at this stage. Public open space, again, until we deal with layout at reserve matters, you won't know exactly how it will be laid out, where it will be laid out, and any offsetting that you would apply. But obviously there's quite a large off-site contribution there. That would obviously reduce as you provide allotments on site, amenity and green space, play parks. So there would potentially still be some off-site contributions, but that would be offset by anything that comes through at a sort of later stage as part of layout. A new one for you, police infrastructure. So we have contribution here that covers both the provision of a new build police station, which is something that the Devon and Cornwall Police are looking at quite seriously for Barnstaple. It also covers a staffing contribution. There is still a little bit of question mark around that staffing contribution, which is something we would seek delegated authority to bottom out with the police. That's mainly, again, in relation to the civil reg compliance. It's a little bit like some of the NHS asks in the past, that it wasn't quite clear exactly how that money is spent and how it relates to the planning application and the direct impacts with the planning application. and then going through the normal ones you would expect to see. Devon County Waste taking a contribution, all of the highway education contributions, Devon County Council taking a secondary school transport contribution, because your secondary schools in the area are slightly further from the site. The site, as with large parts of Groundswell, is slightly outside of the distances that they would be expected to necessarily walk to a secondary school. There was originally a primary school transport contribution, but following discussions with the county around whether that was justified based on the other contributions in relation to primary school and the sort of the walking and cycling distances, they were happy to remove that, subject to those highway safety improvements I discussed right at the start to Shoes Lane or Beeford Road. You'll see there also a fairly long wish list in terms of the county council's requirements. Obviously, a lot of that's to do with securing both safe and suitable access, bus service, the stopping up of traffic onto Brinsworthy Lane, and also really honing down those details in relation to the connectivity and long-term maintenance of the junction and things like that. And then your biodiversity net gain with monitoring fee. I think with this one there was biodiversity net gain was it can be delivered on site. There may be a need for some off site. Obviously, the conditions that we impose deal with either option. And then at the bottom there would be management and maintenance schemes associated with public open space and any surface water drainage systems. So that brings us on to the table that's in the back of your committee report. I won't verbatim read through it. I'm sure you've all read and digested exactly how the sort of harm versus benefits balance has fallen with this application. So we're not saying that there's no, there hasn't been issues where there is some slight conflict with policy. They're they're highlighted in the kind of red and orange colours. But when you weigh them in the balance with the greens, the things that are benefits arising from this proposal, given the work that has been done between the previous application and now what is before you, and some changes in policy position, we are now in a position that we are comfortable recommending approval of this application, seeking delegated authority to finalise negotiations on 106. Finalise the list of conditions, so there may be some tweaks to wording and things like that. The matter in relation to the police staffing contribution as well. And then obviously, just refining all of that into a decision. And just there as a reminder, those are your main considerations, which I have run through in the report. Thank you.
Will we have a 2-minute break?
Yes, okay, 2-minute break. Do it now.
Yeah, enough. Right. Sorry, I'm a bit late.
That's all right.
I'm here.
Do you want to? If you want to. No, you're right. Yeah. If anyone asks questions like
I hear about my favourite pastime. That still remains, it's just pedestrian.
yeah, it is. There's no road.
So it's still a traffic control junction.
Yeah.
So I couldn't see the back there.
Yeah.
So figure, I know, back to the side, you choose lanes. So right in the back. Furthest.
Yeah, walking time 25 minutes.
Yeah, on a good day.
Yeah.
With a pushchair as another style, probably more like.
Right.
It's just. Who is the actual, who is the body of the steel? It's half an hour, each way, and 10 minutes as well, so that's it, more nearly an hour.
Yeah, but now's really not the time to be asking these questions, to be honest.
Just.
Yeah. Yeah, on you, see, you're lovely, it's much. Yeah. So what I have to do is live back. Now I've assessed them, that's where we are.
Yeah, and
Well, no, I've got it, so it's like, I guarantee they're gonna get into my neck with the thing, and I have to something. Very red.
Thank you. We've noted that Councillor Lane has left as per his interest, which is fine. So we move to the registered speakers. We have a number of objectors and a number of statements, and the applicant, the agent and the ward member. So first is a statement to be read for Darren Burnham.
Thank you, Chair. The statement says, I'm deeply concerned about the council's recent habit of adding even more houses under HELAA, such as one recently approved down Old Bideford Road and using government targets which aren't enforceable as cover. The idea of adding another 450 dwellings when one of the largest parts of the local plan has only just started at Westcott North, with another already underway near Lockbeer, is utterly silly and will put even more pressure on overstretched infrastructure. No matter what part of the infrastructure you look at, such as the lack of a link road from Fremont directly out to the A39, converting the A361, A39 that runs south of Barnstable to a 2+2 road, South West Water's lack of treatment upgrades, the massive delay to the upgrade programme to North Devon District Hospital, or a lack of NHS dentists, etc. You won't find the majority of the infrastructure can cope with what is here now, let alone what is being built, and certainly not with what is proposed to be built. How is the plan department supposed to police all this? Having dealt with a developer for nearly 7 years, I can say without a doubt that not everything is being checked to ensure that what a developer submits is completed on time, if at all.
Thank you. Another statement for Jeff.
Statement says this application is not significantly different from the application decisively rejected by both planning officer and this committee recently. The only significant difference is the 5-year supply rule, but this states that the balance should favour approval, not that it guarantees approval. It should be noted the 5-year supply rule is based on figures as at April 2025. A lot of development has been approved since, surely being ruled on this highly controversial application. An update review should have been carried out. The report highlights that this application fails on location outside of any defined development boundary. This facilities would represent unjustified and unsustainable development, landscape impacts, heritage and ecology matters. Whilst the officer report says that there is no highways impact, I'm sure anyone using the Roundswell roundabout will confirm that there are large traffic jams and accidents, and adding 600 plus cars at peak hours will have obvious impacts. The report also fails to note that the application fails a sequential test and fails to note the reduction in the quality of life of existing residents due to lack of infrastructure, increased traffic, etc. I also note that there's been no consultation on the closed redirection of Brinseville Lane. Whilst the application now includes better walking access, this is because of expanding the site. The majority of the site is still beyond normal walking distance for families. It is car dependent and the guarantee of a bus service seems to have been removed. The poor quality of the plan will lead to new residents having flooding issues, lack of infrastructure, traffic noise and reliance on cars. This is a very poor application. If you approve this, then it is hard to see that any application can be turned down, leading eventually to a wall-to-wall development from Roundswell to Bideford. If councillors doesn't have any power in enforcing quality in the planning process, surely you should reject the application as you did last time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Another statement for Jennifer Dory.
I feel it is very unwise to put so many houses on such a steep slope that is so bedevilled by flood zones. The agricultural grassland currently greatly slows the water effectively coming all the way from Torrington from getting to the bottom of the site. There are numerous trees at the bottom of the site that again take in a great deal of water. As some trees are due to be removed with this application, a report says no trees are known to have been blown over nearby, but 3 very old and large beech trees were lost at Brinseville Lane, and I lost a 90-foot tree last year, so trees are being lost nearby. Leaving any trees more vulnerable to damage from increasingly frequent violent storms is going to lead to further tree losses and less water ingestion. The water is taken away by going into pipes turning at 90 degrees to go east to go into a ditch in Brinseville Lane. However, several times a year, the outlets are completely covered by the height of water, as the water cannot drain away quickly enough without faster transmission down the site. This leads to flooding on the A39. I believe it could also affect the house on the northern side of the A39 if this development goes ahead, as the water will not turn 90 degrees if the ditch is not flown adequately. I think it'd be hard to find a measure to ensure sufficient egress of water to prevent flooding issues. Although I'm in a similar area on the other side of Brinseville Lane, I have approximately 100 sizable trees around my house which easily ingest the rainfall. The site is part of the Crackington Formation with mudstone and siltstone that has been felt to be implicated in catastrophic landslides. They are highly prone to slope collapse primarily as they are weak, fine-grained sedimentary rocks that lose significant strength when exposed to water. They're particularly susceptible to softening, disintegration and swelling, which decreases the shear strength of the slope and triggers landslides during rainfall or after weathering. With this site also having underground rivers, this is again not suitable for residential housing, as the amount of water is verified by the flood zones. If over 400 houses are built on the slope, I think there'll be real problems.
Okay, another statement, this time for Kim, excuse me, Kim Lee.
So it says, my name is Kim Lay. I live at 8 Pathfield Close, Roundswell. I'm writing to object to the plans put forward for these dwellings at said site. Point 1 being the roads in Barnstable can just about cope with traffic around Barnstable now. If one road is closed for roadworks or even an accident, it causes major gridlock through the whole of Barnstable, adding even more traffic, and this along with tourist traffic in the summer months, which would make it a nightmare for anyone just trying to get on with their daily business. Point 2. Infrastructure, which includes schools, preschool, doctors, hospitals, etc., which most of these, especially doctors and hospital, can't cope with the amount of people there is now. You're lucky if you can even get a doctor's appointment. Preschool, you can't get your child in, you have to register them even before they are born to be able to get a place. Schools can't cope with all the extra children, no space. It's doctors and a hospital we need, not more houses. Point three, the environment is being ruined and slowly being taken away. It's a place of outstanding beauty, but unfortunately with more houses, wildlife are getting pushed out, hedgerows, trees, which are just as important, soon all be gone if this continues. I just urge you to please reconsider, think of the local community and stop these plans from being passed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Believe we have Mark Kidson, Chair of Lovecock Forward and Newton Tracy Parish Council. Thank you, whenever you're ready.
Very much. Yes, I'm just going to make one point. I was just concerned, and after hearing about the trees as well, that why was not a roundabout considered for this project? It's purely from the road safety aspect. As it stands, it's I think it's going to get accidents there, which I believe the police already are well aware of. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got one more statement to be read for Linda Lee. As Bev said before, sorry, it was Kim Lay, not Lee, so there's no relation as far as I'm aware. So Linda Lee.
Thank you, Chair. States, I write in response to an email which I received recently regarding the above plan application. I'm very concerned about the prospect of another 450 homes proposed in this area, which have seen no provision for any expansion of schools, the hospital, doctors and dentists. Are these vital services being considered? Many people are having problems already finding a dentist or getting an appointment with their GP, waiting ages for hospital appointments too. All these services stretch their limits now. I live in Rooks Court, near the roundabout at the Old Bideford Road in Chews Lane. The traffic here is a nightmare, especially at peak times. The coals lorries, of which there are many, and farm traffic only adds to the congestion. Perhaps open up the bus gate off the Old Bideford Road with ease the flow of traffic. Hard to justify keeping just a few buses that go through the gate. Up to 220 homes are to be built in the land this side of the A39. It would mean a hell of a lot more traffic in this area. I know that homes are being built all around the Barnstable area, but the road infrastructure is never adjusted or improved to meet the demands of the increased traffic which is generated. I'd be very interested to know where the planned access is for both these sites, perhaps for once the builders will be required to put in new roads to ease the traffic flow. I'm shocked and saddened to think that any more development should even be considered off this part of the Old Bideford Road, which is never intended to take this volume of traffic. Chair.
Thank you very much. Next, we have the applicant, Claire Elzers-Hankey. If I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Claire Elzers-Hankey and I'm a chartered town planner and the planning agent for this application. The scheme before you today is a culmination of several years of technical analysis and investigation work on the site, alongside extensive engagement with the council officers. We've worked positively and proactively together with officers through the call for sites process, pre-application discussions, and continued negotiations through the lifespan of this application, resulting in the recommendation of approval in the committee report. The scheme differs from the previously refused scheme with the inclusion of additional pedestrian and cycle links to the north and east, and provision of a local centre to provide convenience store needs and community facilities for local residents, thereby reducing reliance on private vehicles for day-to-day needs. These measures have drastically improved the sustainability credentials of the site, forming a logical extension to Barnstable as one of the main towns in the district that is identified in the local plan to accommodate growth in the area. We have also sought to address all of the technical issues that were identified in the previous application, which has resulted in a range of amendments and mitigation measures that have been found acceptable to all of the relevant technical consultees. Taking into consideration the planning balance, the committee report finds that the benefits of the proposed developments in the form of delivery of new homes to meet an identified housing need, provision of affordable homes, provision of a local centre, and a range of Section 106 contributions towards improving local infrastructure, biodiversity net gain, local services and facilities, and stimulating the local economy significantly outweigh adverse effects. Given the compliance on technical matters and the strong recommendation of officers to approve this application, there are not sufficient grounds to justify refusal of this application, and therefore we ask you to approve this application as per the recommendation set out in the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the agent, Andrew Pegg.
Would councillors, that's Andrew, on the applicant, actually, Andrew Pegg from Wessex. That's a minor point of detail. Thank you very much for listening today, and thank you to the planning officer for a very comprehensive and professional presentation of the proposal. The changes that in the previous application we set out for you in some detail, and hopefully you can agree that this is a much improved proposition with a genuinely sustainable pedestrian and cycle connectivity design, which hopefully provides a sense of community whilst it's still connected to bonds for its economy and services. Just one thing for me to pick up perhaps is to clarify our view on access and the access arrangement. The gentleman earlier was querying about roundabout versus signalised junction. From our perspective, or just in terms of detail, side access is a 3-arm signal control junction. A signalised access junction provides much better overall performance and flexibility, allowing traffic on the A39 to be actively managed, prioritised when required, whilst still accommodating development, traffic safety and efficiently. Design is also future ready, allowing it for any long-term potential widening of the A39. Thinking, feeling this. Hold it up. But crucially, particularly in light of what we've talked about in terms of connectivity, a signalised junction delivers much safer, also safe and controlled pedestrian and cycle crossings, which a roundabout cannot provide the same standard on a road of this nature. These control crossings are fundamental to making the site sustainable, reducing severance and supporting active travel, line with the national local plan transport policies. Significant capacity has also been built into the junction design, with 2 ahead lanes in each direction and a segregated right-hand turn. Capacity modelling has been undertaken in a model which is called NINSIG, which is the industry standard. The modelling includes allowances for background traffic growth and committed developments, other committed developments in the area, I think. The work shows that the junction will operate freely with minimal queuing and negligible impacts on journey times. And the design outcome has been worked through, as my colleague Claire said, over a long period of time and agreed with the local highway authority, Devon County Council. So finally, I sincerely hope that this much improved and thoroughly compiled proposal can meet with your approval. And once again, thank you for listening and hearing the application today.
Thank you very much. Next, we have the adjoining ward member, Councillor Knight. David Knight.
Yes, thank you. As announced, I am Councillor David Knight of the adjoining ward. People have touched on the government figures for our housing targets. I would like the officer to remind the public here exactly what those numbers are per year. Slightly scares me, but I'll move forward and move on from that. There is a thread, speeches that have been delivered. Traffic always comes to mind. I've been here more than 10 years and traffic is now building to a point it has immeasurable consequences on people's lives getting around. They need to drive around, they need to go to Sainsbury's, they need to go here and there, and they need to go back the other way. Sadly, being the Roundswell councillor, I've pretty much got the roughest end of the stick with traffic. I believe we're now approaching a point where we are getting to a little bit of a car park that forms a ring around Roundswell. And this is backed up by all the public who live here. We're just facing immeasurable problems. As I'm here to represent the public, not the committee, I'll back up what the public has said. And these are the questions to the committee. Does that traffic modelling back up the installation of the signal control junction of this development on the A39? What I'd like to do is initiate that picture which has been put up. I took it upon myself to go around and have a look at issues in the area. And at 7:50 in the morning, this is the actual queue from that point. So this is actual figures. There's the back of the queue. So I would argue that's saying that there's no impact on the traffic. How is that junction going to work with this queue of traffic? Versus, as cited in the local plan, the roundabout with the highway link through to Old Bideford Road. The officer today has covered some of the aspects of connectivity and sustainable transport. However, I'm actually here again representing the public, talking to parents who both have to work to have a house. Walking longer than 15 to 20 minutes each way is just not sustainable. So from the back of the site, I think the figures were 25 minutes, but obviously on a good day, if you've got 2 children and a pushchair, it's more likely going to be 30 minutes each way and 10 minutes at school. So that's actually an hour plus. I still have great concerns about the signal control junction versus the roundabout. I think the roundabout with that junction through would actually massively benefit all of the area. It would change the traffic flow dramatically. People would not be getting stuck in Old Bideford Road trying to get out. And this leads on to traffic leaving this site. If they are not going to walk, which I don't believe many of them actually will walk 15, 20 minutes, which is not many of those houses, they will leave the site. The traffic control junction will be initiated. That will slow that traffic down more, and you can just flip. So the next picture shows the view away. That traffic goes all the way down to there. So yeah, that I don't know how to express it, but it's here for the committee today to debate those issues. But I have great concerns about the cumulative effect of the traffic on the area. And as cited, the public have said there's another development down Old Bideford Road. Will those residents actually even be able to leave? I don't know. That's for the committee to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Knight. Just to remind everybody that brings to an end any public participation. We've an opportunity for any responses from the officer. I don't know if there's anything raised you want to come back to. Yeah, I'll come to you when we go to debate after questions. I've written down, Councillor Walker, you're not.
Stop this.
On his back.
Yeah, so it's my fault for unplugging it.
Sure.
Oh,
Where's it gone? I've got it open.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you wanted to come back at all now, but perhaps not. There'll be plenty of time later on. I think members are going to have some questions. So thank you. We will move to questions now. The question, Councillor.
yes, I have it.
Okay. Councillor Walker and then Councillor Ricky Knight.
Right, just one question for Jenny. We had a meeting a while back about the crossing point on the Old Bideford Road. Is the intention to keep this as we discussed at that meeting with the crossing points and the pavement being completed that isn't there at the moment?
Yes, that's right. So it's to give that kind of fallback position that were the application on Old Bideford Road not to come forward in advance of this one or the other way around, that essentially both applications need to provide that bit of safety infrastructure, the crossing point, the formalised crossing point and the footway. It gives a kind of either or option for both applications, but yeah, same arrangement as we had discussed.
And another question, which may be for highways actually, is there actually a plan with this development to build out the road through Glenwood Drive?
So there's no proposals for a vehicular road through to Glenwood Drive as part of this application. It is purely a footway and cycle link.
But that could happen in the future if another, it would still be able to happen. So if for an alternative, it was come forward as a part of an alternative route out of Remington and that area.
Works of that nature would require another planning application of some form, whether that's a county-led highways improvement scheme, or if there were other land that came forward that required an access to come out. I don't know, Paul, whether you've got anything to add to that. Do you want to come in?
So I think it's fair to say at this stage that one of the key issues here is regarding this access link. Instrumentally, I believe it was probably about 15 years ago, we were looking at a kind of a Bicklington road link between the 839 and the Fremington Road itself. Over time, that's been discounted. It was removed from the local plan, I believe, for political reasons back in about 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago. There was not much local support for that Bicklington road link, and hence it was removed effectively from most legislative documents at that time. The only place that really exists now is in respect to the transport infrastructure plan that Devon County Council holds, but it's quite far down the agenda on any item to be provided. I think your case officer is quite correct. The works would require a full grant of planning permission if you were to consider a road link via the option land. But before us is a footway cycleway on the use of that option land. You have time sales in that indicates that be provided by way of the Redrow agreement led approach. And therefore it's currently before us that it is to be a cycleway link. But as I say, it's something considered as part of any planning application at a future date that none of us would be aware of at this stage.
So just to clarify that the planning permission for the road through Glenwood Drive doesn't exist anymore, is that right?
Well, I can confirm it. There's no planning permission for it. There never has been planning permission, but there's an option agreement that actually safeguards a potential highway link on that land. That option agreement isn't being drawn down at the current time. And there's no intention to draw that option down for the purposes of a road. But it can be drawn down based on legal advice for the creation of a footway cycleway here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knight. Ricky.
To be honest, Chair, that was my question, and seeing Paul Young here, it was the same as last time. I just really wanted his input with regard to the access, but there was a half a question coming. I can see how traffic can come in to the development. How about getting out if you want to go towards Barnstable? Basic question, really.
So of course, I mean, if I said to you, members, you will be aware in the early stages of not only this application, but the kind of pre-application to this, back in 2021, as a highway authority, we did identify a preferred roundabout approach to the development. The developer was more akin to providing a signalised junction for whatever reasons. And of course, we've considered that in the grand scheme of things, and the evidence before us would suggest that that would work perfectly acceptably within the kind of junction modelling exercises that have been undertaken. In terms of looking at the kind of traffic movements to and from the site, the indicated layout would certainly be able to accommodate all of those vehicle movements that would be either entering the site or leaving the site. It provides sufficient queuing capacity within the kind of right turn lane and within the site itself for vehicles, whether they're turning left towards Biddyford or right towards Barnstable. And I think the key in all of this, of course, is the fact it's a signal control junction. It wouldn't work unless it was a signal control junction, and you do create those natural breaks in traffic as well. So during peak times, it will be effectively joining queues in one direction or the other. Outside of those peak times, you would expect that the lighting system would create natural breaks on traffic approaching the Rainsville roundabout. So that would create kind of better opportunities in itself, you would have thought, as in the operation of Rainsville roundabout itself.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll come back with my comments.
Thank you. Well, just while we're on that, so we've seen drone footage of traffic moving very gently. We've had pictures from Councillor David Knight at peak hours and the 10 to 8 photograph. And you've just made an interesting comment about how the signalling may help the Roundswell roundabout, which I think is interesting. Does that mean you're agreeing with Andrew Pegg in terms of his analysis that actually this is a better solution than a roundabout? Would you go that far? I'm just picking up on 6.4 on page 61 about the roundabout being the preferred option initially. So I don't know if you want to provide any more commentary on that, because clearly the access here is a key part of the application.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say, as I say, in the early kind of stages of the process, that a roundabout was seen as the preferred option. Of course, we can only react to what's put before us, and if there was some overriding reason why we felt a signals approach was unsatisfactory, I wouldn't be sat here today to say that it was acceptable. Both this junction, or the proposed junction, and 2 or 3 other junctions referred to in the report have been the subject of detailed junction modelling approach. Quite clearly, what this junction arrangement has shown is that where we may have a concern is where you unnecessarily traffic. So if you were to propose that junction at midnight, when there's very little traffic around, you're effectively being held at a red stop for no reason. A roundabout keeps traffic free flowing, most of the time when there's any kind of queuing involved, then the signalised approach works better. And I think it certainly works better to make that kind of connectivity a sustainable approach for kind of those that may be walking or cycling, because it kind of introduces a particular phase for them to satisfactorily cross that road. Of course, as a highway authority, we have to consider when the peak times would be in operation of those junctions, where the biggest concern would be. Peak time 8 to 9 in the morning, of course, and 5 to 6 in the evening. Most of the time outside of those times, the traffic would be considered to be flowing a lot more free than what it does. And of course, when you introduce those signalised breaks in the traffic, you will probably find that there will be more opportunities at Rainsville roundabout to access on the network than what you currently experience now. So I think all I can say, Chair, is that, it's kind of pros and cons for either scheme that you look at, but this is perfectly acceptable in the sense it's being identified through the junction modelling process, that it would adequately accommodate. I think the crucial thing we hear from members, of course, is that we're not oblivious to the fact that there is kind of significant queuing at certain times. I think that you have to ask yourself is, does the development completely change the experience of what you already see? The evidence before us is that you will still experience queuing, but it doesn't fundamentally alter or change the operation of the junction itself. So whilst at the moment you may queue for, say, 30 minutes in the morning, you will find that you may queue for an extra 10, 15 seconds because of the additional.
Okay, thank you very much. Before Councillor Levy, did you have a question? Can I just slip one in there first about the bus? Because that's been mentioned in the report. Am I correct in reading that we have bus provision that will be funded for a number of years, triggered by a certain number of dwellings being occupied or built out.
Yes, so the response from Highways is that, so the developer has done their own work with Stagecoach and has, agreed to fund the bus service for the first 3 years. And obviously the county would also want that from the sustainable travel perspective, so that, if it's not done one way, it would be done via contributions the other way. Obviously the difficulty with that in the first, if you do that from the date of commencement of development, it's not actually going to be anybody on the site. So yeah, it's having probably a thinking liaison with the county Stagecoach around when the numbers trigger that viability of a bus service. So there may be a period of time where there's some dwellings occupied where they wouldn't necessarily have access to that. But yeah, that would be something we'd have to look at through the Section 106 process.
Councillor Lever, you have another question, and then Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to officers for reports, written and verbal. So one of the things that was said earlier on was that policy BAR 09, which is the Glenwood Farm development, is complete, is the word that you used, Jenny. So I look at that policy and it says the transport and this is in paragraph 3 towards the bottom of that policy. The transport and connectivity strategy for the site will provide a road between the A39 and Old Bideford Road. Clearly that road's not there, so I wonder if you could clarify, is the plan policy no longer extant, or is that complete but without that bit? And then secondly, related to that, there is Section 106 agreement for the Glenwood Farm site, which was signed in 2024, which has that option for DCC to buy the land, linking the site and the A39 for £1 on a 15-year option agreement. I understand that from what the officer, DCC Highways officer, has said, that there is no intention to draw it down to the provision of a road, and I wonder if that could be clarified about how that fits in both with BAR 09, but also the local transport infrastructure plan. I wonder also perhaps if we could be given some clarity about the what the report says. I take you to paragraph 6.7, which says that there's no detailed commentary of how the change from the DCC Highways point of view, change from a roundabout to a T-junction, how that has been reached. We don't have that information as far as I'm aware. There's 3 questions in there. Thank you.
I was going to say that stop at 3, otherwise
I could come up with more, honestly, but I won't. Thank you.
The last one, perhaps we go straight back to Paul Young on, unless you.
Go back into it if
So
we
just
want, yeah.
back to this roundabout Seagull Junction. Can you add any further on the process you've been through from that, or was this driven by what the applicants put before you that you then had to consider?
I think that's very much the case, Chair. I think, as I said, we set in the position that a roundabout would have been our preferred option at the earliest opportunity. The developer has, as you would expect, undertaken a very detailed transport assessment, identifying both the site junction arrangements and consideration of some other critical junctions as part of the overall design concept. And I think in terms of the site junction preference as a signalised approach, that was certainly something that came through from the developer as an alternative to the roundabout. And we, of course, can only consider what's before us. There would be no justification, in my opinion, to say a signalised approach is unacceptable because we would prefer a roundabout. If both options could satisfactorily work, it would be down to the developer to decide what they wish to progress with. I think certainly in terms of what I would describe as highway safety for pedestrian users, cyclists, those of a more vulnerable nature, I think the signalised approach would work better for them because it provides a standalone phasing operation when all traffic is held for those to safely accommodate movements across the A39.
Okay, thank you. So BAR 09 arrangements, completion of or not?
Yeah, so BAR 09 is complete. I think the final, the bit of the industrial land has now also been developed. There's some industrial units on there that we've finished fairly recently. The rest of the dwellings are complete. So as far as that allocated site is concerned, that has been built out. I've had a look at the committee report that came off the back of that, and the dedication of the land as part of the Section 106 agreement is to enable the future delivery of the link. But it's dedicated the land to the county councils that if they wish to bring that link forward, that they bring it forward. That would suggest to me that as part of the planning application for VAR 09, the developer demonstrated that based on the transport assessment and the traffic movements that were coming out of their development, that they could actually identify that capacity existed on Old Biddyford Road for them to be able to utilise that as the access point in and out, rather than having to actually physically deliver this as part of their development. Because otherwise the houses wouldn't have been developed, we would have been dealing with it in a similar situation as we propose to with this one, where if you need something as an essential piece of infrastructure for something to be built, you would ensure that it's there and in place and ready for use prior to the person living in a house. But with the instance with that BAR 09 application, the land was dedicated to the county to consider whether they wanted to take that link forward as part of the transport infrastructure plan.
That was a supplementary question.
Yep. Yes.
Thank you. So from that, what I'm seeing is that what I'm hearing from Jenny is that BAR 09, that the transport and connectivity strategy of the site will provide a road through the site to the section between A39 Bideford Road and the section 106 that requests £158,000 for any of the following, which is updates to upgrades of junctions, including the upgrading of junction onto the A39. That's kind of not relevant. It's not considered to be something that needs to be developed. But I suppose a follow-up question for Paul is that the transport information that you've received from the applicant that provides a detailed, I suppose, backup for the signalised junction, does that take into account that there are 3 junctions onto the main road network, specifically identified in BAR 02, BAR 03 and BAR 09, that those none of those have been delivered? Does that take that into account? Does that take the traffic growth into account since the local transport plan and the local plan were written? Does it take into account the ongoing applications? I believe we've got more applications on Old Bideford Road, because what people experience is traffic nightmare, absolute traffic nightmare. And I'm not seeing any prospect of any of those links onto the main road network being delivered. And this is an opportunity to deliver something which I thought we're going to plan, 2 plans. And it appears not to be something that is being actively considered. I wondered if you could clarify all of that for me, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think what's quite critical in all of this is that the process that we would expect the developer to undertake, which they have done as part of their detailed transport assessment, is not only to look at the precise site junction arrangements, but to also look at the kind of much wider ranging impact of the development. So it's included within that transport assessment are the 3 key junctions that we identified in the earlier part of the process for the applicant to look at. And that was the Lake roundabout, the Rangewood roundabout, and the square about stroke bar and the henge, which we all refer to. They all form part of the detailed junction modelling exercise, which forms part of that transport assessment, as well as the site junction itself. They've used industry standard software to carry out that assessment. There were manual traffic counts that were carried out in 2022 and then updated in 2024. And of course, when the junction and modelling is carried out, there's a projected opening date of, say, in the period of 2030 was one of the kind of identified years. And that identification would take into account all other committed development. So at the time of the application, what other developments have actually been formally granted planning approval? There will be regard to applications that might be in the planning process. And normally as a highway authority, we would also pick up on any other applications that might be under consideration as part of our local plan review. So that would typically be forming part of the process. The manual traffic counts, of course, would assess the existing situation, and the full detailed traffic count analysis would also look at trip rate movements as well. So all of that process you would expect within the transport assessment, which it was. In addition to that, there's another standard set of software, which members may be aware of, what they call the Tempro and the growth factor, which looks at a lot of the sensor data. So it looks at in terms of what the projected kind of population growth may be in the area, the number of additional children, elderly kind of growth, and the kind of car parking demand, as well as public transport factors have been kind of worked into the grand equation as such. And so we don't look at these schemes in isolation. We do have to judge the impact overall. As I say, when we do recognise there is an increase in traffic, it's not so much that there will be an increase in traffic, it's to look at that kind of peak traffic generation. It's to look at how the actual effect may be on the junction operation. And so I would be the first to recognise that there's a number of measures that have been carried out more recently in Barnstaple and North Devon beyond, which, you know, members of the public may not be supportive of. These may be measures that have not come through the development management process, but maybe more so through, say, transportation planning, where you've seen certain schemes that might be to encourage more use of public transport, implementation of bus gates, this kind of approach. So we recognise that there may be some kind of impact. My job, of course, is to recognise what this development may do in respect of those alterations and those changes. So all I can say is, yes, we've got a very comprehensive transport assessment that we, would struggle to find any difference in terms of the conclusions that have been reached.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rutty.
Do you want me to come back on that?
Can I ask two questions, Chair? I just want some clarity on the picture you've got up on the screen. By BAR 10, there's a little bus symbol, and I wanted some clarity on what that was and what that area was.
Yeah, so that would be, it was I suppose it's for a park and change facility, as part of the plan, so park up and hop on the bus to take the onward travel into Barnstaple. I'm not aware, we haven't certainly had any applications of that, Paul. I don't know whether you're aware of anything formal coming forward.
Not at this stage.
No, but that is land that's is owned by the county council along that section there as well, I think, so.
And then, next to 1.6 in the housing and needs mix section, in the table extract from Hender, there's a bit of a maths error, where if they were to build all 450 houses, the amount of houses wouldn't divide properly, which means that they would be half a house short if they were to make 15% one-bed houses. So I'm not sure that if they were to build 450 houses, that we'd be able to accurately, obviously enforce these number of houses with the fence.
So at the moment, they haven't fixed any housing mix on that, the Hedner table is what like you said, our preference would be. How that's then obviously divided up across 450, there would be obviously that bit of discretion where it's one unit that takes it into being a slightly different slightly higher percentage, we've got a bit of a buffer. We run we've got an internal calculator that we use, and there's sort of a buffer where you'll have just right or there's slightly high, slightly low, but there's a little bit of wriggle room within that to sort of close to those percentages where you've got larger numbers of dwellings like this, where there might be a fractional difference.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, just for you, that headline is just.
Yeah, hang on, wait, through the, do it through the mic, please. And then you had another response.
That headline mix is seeking a mixed, community in terms of bed spaces, so it probably wouldn't be that prescriptive, but we don't want all 4 beds, or we don't want all 1 beds, we want a mixed, site, because we recognise that then that, meets different people's needs, you know, coming forward.
Did you want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, in terms of the Glenwood Farm, policy in regards to that transport connectivity, and I think there is something in the paragraph, isn't there, about easing Roundswell traffic. So obviously this was adopted 2018, it would have been written in advance of that time. I think, as I'm sure we all know, planning changes quite radically, and it is a desired list. I'm sure in terms of the planning policy team writing that was good intentions in terms of that Brownswell. We recognise that Brownswell is a pinch point in terms of transport. But as Paul said, you know, when applications come in and if they're technically supported by a transport assessment, that it is reasonable for another form of junction or not that A39 link, then as an appeal, we wouldn't win on that policy basis. The planning inspectorate would look at that what the technical transport assessment and strategy is in front of us in terms of those technical numbers. And equally, we are reliant on Devon County Council Highway Engineer to ensure that they are happy that there's safe and suitable access being provided in terms of those numbers. So I guess just to kind of give you a little bit of background on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coombs.
Could I ask maybe Paul, when they do the assessments, does any consideration take place if there was to be any accidents? Because with where this is placed, without having any vehicle access across, what we've been talking about onto Glenwood Drive, it would be a massive long stretch where they are with only having the one access out. I think they'd have to go possibly all the way up to the Instow junction to be able to come back round.
Thank you, Chair. I think the difficulty is that, you know, whilst we would prefer to kind of legislate effectively for accidents, and it's not unusual for, certainly historically, we would end up with a development that offered more than one kind of junction point of access into a site. So if there was an accident or maintenance requirements, there was a position where you could take an alternative.
Where you have a situation occasionally that might be.
The bike's dropped off, so give it a tap.
Whilst you may have a situation where accidents occasionally occur and you will have a situation where the traffic is brought to a standstill, gridlocks, you know, whatever you would want to call it. I don't believe we could deny or refuse a planning application on the basis that an accident or an incident might have unacceptable consequences on the highway network. You know, it's not just a case of, you know, when you have accidents, you may have vehicles that break down or whatever it may be, but I don't think that would be grounds to refuse an application such as this. I think it's an inconvenience. And we all see the problems that arise when occasionally there is a serious accident or an incident and traffic's rerouted and, you know, people are delayed or whatever for an hour or so, you know, but it's not something I don't think in planning terms that we would find that we could, you know, refuse an application on that basis. I think in terms of this particular junction layout, it is quite generous in terms of the number of lanes that are being provided, the kind of queuing capacity within there. So anything other than what I would call a very serious or accident or fatality, you would expect that the traffic would still be able to kind of freely move, bearing in mind the amount of highway land that's being given over to this junction improvement vision.
Okay. I don't see any more hands up, so that's will bring questions to a close. So we will now go to Councillor Helen Walker, who called the application to committee. So over to you, Helen Walker.
Just for a bit of clarity for anybody who might be wondering, although Councillor David Knight's ward is called Roundswell, what we commonly refer to as Roundswell is actually part of Bickington ward, which I represent. I would like to thank the developers to start off with for listening to a lot of the concerns that were raised at the previous planning application, and see that this is a significantly better application than we had previously, particularly with the link to what is referred to as the bridge to nowhere across the A39, and it would make it into a bridge to somewhere, which would then justify the expense that was put in for that bridge. I do have quite a few concerns about this development. Firstly, I would actually have liked to, if this land was going to be included in a future local plan, I would have liked to have seen it brought forward with full design principles, because this is this is quite a small site in a very large area of open space. And it would have been better if it could have been used as part of the local plan, but unfortunately, due to government policy that we have to build 1,300 houses a year for the next 10 years, these pots of land are coming forward in isolation, not in a structured plan, which is a great shame for the area. So things I would like to address, one of which would be the travel arrangements from the site. The school that has been voted as the school for this site would be Roundswell Primary Academy. I have had a lot of contact recently from the academy, well, from the governors of the academy, saying that there is a problem with parking outside the school. I think it personally, this is partly due to the school not putting their travel plan in place, but this could cause more problems with that. There's also a further problem on getting onto the cycleway and the footpaths. A bridge was removed from footpath 17 some time ago, I understand by mistake, which has never been reinstated, which means that the connectivity through to Bickington and the further walking and cycle structure in the area isn't there. So there are concerns sort of for the further placemaking, that we cannot access currently existing routes easily, especially without there's still some bits that are reliant on the 210 houses on Old Bideford Road that has planning permission being built out, particularly the Old Bideford Road improvements themselves. I can see there are a lot of advantages to this as well, though it is a development that is not on the Old Bideford Road, and it is not on the B3232. Well, 33, I can't remember which one it is. Which, if you've driven on that road this morning, you will realise it's absolutely gridlocked due to the fact that Anstey Way in Instow is closed. Which means that the traffic is currently backing up to, well, at 8:30 when I came down, the traffic was backing up to Sidpath Junction, commonly known as the Stones Roundabout. So I am concerned about the traffic. I am pleased that it's not on the Old Bideford Road or the Bickington Road. But it is a very, very difficult one to determine, because the government have pushed these targets onto us. And although I heard in the one of the statements that these targets are not enforceable, I think they are going to be enforceable, and I think the government will realise fairly quickly that this is personal opinion, that they need to make these to get their house building targets met. They will be enforcing these house building targets. So that's, as I say, a lot of this is opinion, but I think it's based on knowing the area.
Thank Thank you. There were kind of a couple of questions in there as well, weren't there? Saying I'm not aware of this bridge number 17.
Yeah, it's on footpath 17 there. There should be a bridge at the bottom of it going over Muddlebrook. That was removed by Devon County Council contractors about 3 years ago, I think it was now. Mistakenly, because they should have removed one further up Muddlebrook and has never been replaced. So that means that there is a gap on the footpath and cycle network, which I know is not very close to this development.
I was going to say, where is that in relation to the site? Is it on the plan?
It's near the school, so it's at the bottom of the plan area. It's not actually on this plan. It's a little bit further down, but it's the link to the cycle network.
Yeah.
So about where Jane's pointing now.
Probably something to pick up outside of this.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, it's been reported.
Okay, members. Thank you, Councillor Walker. No hands. Ricky Knight, thank you. Councillor Knight, sorry.
Thank you, Jim. And yeah, well, I'm sure there's lots of comments, but people are shy, I can imagine. I think first and foremost, this is a really robust presentation, and I compliment the planning officer. It was a great read. Went on for a long time. And I think most of us know this application off by heart by now. We had 2 site visits, plus lots of drone footage, and it's been very helpful. At the last meeting, I can remember bringing up the roundabout thing, which keeps coming back to bite us, as it were. And I appreciate what Mr. Young said about the applicants didn't initially put in a roundabout, and hence you work with what you've got. I'm increasingly in 2 minds now that the cycle and pedestrian access over the bridge to nowhere has been dealt with, and it may be longer. But there's one thing about roundabouts I know as a cyclist, and that is they are deadly. They really are. The one at the bottom of Cheswood and Bishop's Thornton, which has just been remedied, it's got traffic lights now for pedestrians, and I use that as a cyclist because I tried to get across that roundabout on a bike, and I'm reasonably good. I'm an instructor after all. It is deadly, and as such, I do prefer the idea of the lights now, and I've thought about it, particularly with this bridge to nowhere now being accessible for pedestrians. And presumably, it means that cyclists can access Brinsworthy as well by cycling through the site, which in itself, even if we don't exist, is a plus. The 2 things with 5-year bill supply, I'm afraid that there's nothing we can do about that. Why? Because we have 3 crises. We have a housing crisis, and quite frankly, from our discussions, we definitely have a traffic crisis as well. Let's call it that. And number 3, of course, which underwrites it all, is the climate crisis. And I'm afraid what gets prioritised. I know there's a housing crisis. People are crying out for somewhere to live. These houses will sell. And as for in my opinion, okay, it's my opinion that it will sell. In terms of the traffic, well, it's not from 4 to 6. It's 3 and 5 to 6. I mean, it starts the crisis. The traffic crisis. It starts much earlier than that, and sometimes it goes on a lot longer as well, depending on flexible working hours. So, the downstream bridge was built to alleviate the traffic, and it's clogging up already, as most of us knew it would. I haven't got a solution to that other than the railway link to Bideford, but let's leave that to one side. My particular focus is on the climate crisis, and I'm looking at everything will be done, I hope, to make sure the constructions of the houses are as environmentally and ecologically friendly as possible. That's down to building regs, I know, most of the time, but I'm particularly pleased with the emphasis that the planning office have put with the TPLs, which we now know is a high priority. that's a sort of concentration, that's a sort of focus I am looking for cycling and trees. There's going to be, what was that word you used, Tracy? It was some sort of fence.
It's a miss.
Miss fence, that's right. Not sure what that is, but I'm sure I could hit it. Yeah, that's my number one priority. There's a BNG on site, you say, but we also have other ways of dealing with that. There's going to be ecological and environmental damage inevitably, but I naively or whatever, professionally, really applaud the emphasis and the focus you placed on the ancient and what to call it, veteran woodland. Oh yes, and thanks to Mr. Pegg as well for pointing out the pros and cons, and Mr. Young, pros and cons of the roundabout. You know, we've had a new roundabout at Lanky with another bridge to nowhere, but it won't be to nowhere eventually, I'm sure. We've had a massive reconstruction of the South Molton one. And every community, every city and town in this country, it suffers from massive traffic build-ups throughout the day most of the time, and we're not going to get away with it. You know that anyone who journeys from big parts of Bideford or across to get to Bournemouth in Ilfracombe every day must take into account they've got an extra 2.5 hours on their working day, which is sad in a way, but it's reality. I'm rambling, but those are my comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Prowse, then Councillor Bishop.
Chair, I unlike Councillor Knight, have got the responsibility for trying to produce, as the lead member, for a new local plan. So we're facing a situation where these targets, a lot of people may say are unrealistic, but the reality is we've got to do our best. Otherwise, our new local plan will not pass the inspector. We've agreed to do that in 30 months. One thing's in my mind is for sure, and picking out what Councillor Walker said, is that this application is only showing part of what potentially could be one of the solutions to help meeting our target. So I think the reality is, by approving this today, we're starting a bigger development probably. So I think we've got to regard this as phase one. And therefore I think we need to be content about the type of junction here, not just for this development, but thinking ahead about a much bigger allocation. For me, the problem before was about the sustainability of it. Not necessarily just about linking to the other side of the bypass, but having some facilities that were meaningful within it. Having been around too long, back in the 80s, was involved in the original Ranswell negotiations with the consortium, where we we're going to have a pub and shops. We we're going to have all those things as well in Ranswell, and they became unviable and gradually dropped away. So I just think that, and I pick up again what Councillor Walker said, she's completely right, that master planning for a bigger site may give us much more guarantee about providing the most facility. Having said that, most of the issues with the last application have been addressed, and therefore, Chair, I will move the recommendation. And to add what's been said before, that Jenny Meakin's presentation and the report are spot on, make it very easy to understand, and not just for members, for the public. But I'll move the recommendation, Chair. It will go. It will be, as I said, I think it's likely to be included within the next local plan, and probably a slightly bigger area as well, to make use of the new facilities and the new access of the bypass. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Prowse. So we'll look for a seconder. Do we have a seconder? Councillor B, I believe, was first. Thank you. I will come to you in a moment, Councillor Lee, but it's interesting what's been picked up on there in terms of the wider picture, but the officer presentation went through each of the 6 reasons very, very helpfully, and fundamentally, the 5-year and supply, the tilted balance. And we have before us a conclusion that says that the adverse impacts, are not considered to significantly and demonstrably outweigh substantial public benefits. You know, we're between a rock and a hard place here, aren't we? On the one hand, there's this desperate need for housing, desperate need for affordable housing, and this can deliver that. Yet we have the impacts on highways, traffic, congestion that inevitably comes with that. I was encouraged to read in the report the amount of money, the 180,000 for the bus service, and that goes part of the way, but also to encourage cyclists, and if we can have an exchange of some kind from the bus on the other side that was identified by Councillor Rutty, that would all help. So on balance, I think I will be voting to support that as well, but I'll come back to other members, and I think Councillor Lever, Councillor Bishop, and then Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just uneasy about the affordable housing, which has been given very significant weight, and I just wonder if that is what has pushed it to approval. I realise that a lot of the other things have also been dealt with, but it's just always troubled me because there's always the viability option for the development, and effectively we have no control over it. So I'm concerned, and therefore thinking about building things.
This was something that we did have a discussion about yesterday. No, it's very difficult because we see this happen time and time again, don't we? We've got our traffic light system here, and it's very clearly got our three green stars for our affordable housing, and then if that were to fall away, I believe, members are not going to be happy. But having said that, we've got a policy compliance scheme, and that's what's been offered up as part of this application. We don't know whether the viability will come in at a later date. Sure. It's not a necessarily difficult site to deliver in terms of abnormal costs. But I think our officers will try and clarify that back to you as they say yes.
So I think just in terms of this application, obviously the previous application was us saying that we need to have 30% affordable housing as well. So the tilt isn't just on that. There is wider changes from when I think it's 2024 when it came back. Particularly I think something that Councillor Walker picked up on, Labour government coming in, reintroducing those mandatory targets, 1.5 million homes being built over the next 5 years, 1,300 dwellings per year for us. It's huge. But also the case officer has really worked really hard since that June 2024 refusal. We have got more land now, so that connectivity is much better. There's a bus service. I think the last time it was quite house driven. It was quite an isolated location with housing really on there. So it is much more of a mixed use, sustainable, I feel, site. Yes, we are always a challenge of viability, and then there's lots of schemes that I know I speak to you about on all your own boards about viability. We don't have to accept a viability challenge for the first 5 years. We also have affordable housing as a corporate priority. So the last thing we would lose if there was a viability challenge would be affordable housing. We would look at other things that we could lose that would make the scheme viable. The affordable housing would absolutely be the last thing. So if I can kind of give you some confidence on that, we definitely will be prioritising that affordable housing is delivered on this site.
I have another question, actually. I assume that the community centre will be triggered in the same way that the bus service will be by a certain number of houses being built. Is that correct? This is an outline plan.
Yeah, so community sort of centres are quite difficult in that you do have to have people with commercial interest in wanting to develop them. So again, that will depend on numbers of dwellings on site. So yeah, we would discuss through the section 106 and the conditions process exactly how we would refine that. But yeah, it will be dependent on sort of bodies needing to use the services.
Okay, councillor Lever.
Thank you. I have to say, I struggle with this application because on the one hand, the provision of much needed affordable housing is a real positive for me. And I'm looking at pages 75 and 76 and that table, which hopefully is colour coded, about what is positive and what's not so positive. I'm kind of surprised that the items which have got the two red blobs next to them, which is landscape, heritage and ecology, haven't featured more in the discussion. I kind of thought that other members of the committee might pick those up, and I suppose for me there is a question about how to balance all the various different aspects of this application and precedent setting. But what I come back to is the answers to the questions which I asked, particularly around the highways network, and I haven't as yet had a full understanding or full explanation about how to think about this in a wider context, and particularly thinking about the contributions made by or representations made by various members of the public and indeed the neighbouring ward councillor about, we have in the plans, we have links, road links onto the main road network, which it sounds as though there is no intention to deliver. You know, it has been stated that despite the section 106 on Glenwood Farm, that it was just stated by Paul that there's, I think it was by Paul, yeah, there is no intention to draw down for provision of a road. So I asked the question, what is the point of the plan? What is the point of the local infrastructure plan? How can we assess this in its broader strategic context and know that we are not only getting good placemaking, which I question, and I go back to Councillor Prouse's and Councillor Walker's comments on that, but how can we know that the infrastructure which is needed or identified as being needed in the plans are ever going to be delivered? It seems to me that what we have is a bit of a mishmash of, well, yeah, we'd quite like a roundabout. Nah, it's all right, don't need it, it's fine. Although the planning policy is clear, although the section 106 is clear, although the local transport infrastructure plan is clear, no, it's not happening. So how can we as councillors, listening to members of the public, how can we look at this application and fully understand the wider transport and traffic implications, where we have three links onto the main highway which appear not to be deliverable? And indeed, I spoke to a senior highways officer yesterday who confirmed for me that actually there are no plans, there's no money to deliver the links onto the A39 of the link road. That is of huge concern, massive concern to people who live in the west of Barnstaple. And then somebody mentioned, maybe it was Councillor Knight mentioned about Lanky and that bridge to nowhere, which isn't a bridge to nowhere, as you rightly say, because that will join on to that Westacott extension. All that money has been spent in improving that junction, the Lanky junction, turn it into a roundabout on the basis, A, it enables access, but also it improves the safety. There is a bridge. I don't think it's very pretty, but it doesn't matter. There is a bridge. So I suppose my question is, it isn't a question, it's a comment. We've heard about the various standard industry standard software that has been included in the transport assessment provided by the developer, but I as yet don't believe we've had any clarity about how do we as a planning authority actually make sure that the development that does take place actually meets the policy tests of highways. I would be very interested for us to understand not only this application, but how it fits into that wider strategic network more effectively. So I would like to propose that we have a deferment for a cycle, 2 cycles, so that we can really fully understand the highways network, the cumulative impact, the lack of deliverability of the other junctions onto the network, because I can't see how this is going to help deliver what has already been set out in the plans. I would like to understand that. And I don't think the answers that have been given give us sufficient clarity to understand that. Thank you.
Councillor Grooms, are you seconding that amendment? Because I'll look for a seconder first.
Yeah, second that.
You'll second that amendment, okay, and then you can, if you wish.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that I support what councillor Lever is saying, and this feels to me that we could end up with various developments like we have done with no actual plan around the transport. So you've got all these developments coming out and actually nothing is linking all these transport together. So I do think that we do need to have some more information on this.
To know. Officers want to comment on that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think it helps to separate out the issues here. So today you've got an application in front of you where they put in a junction design, transport impact, transport assessment that shows the movement, shows the junction design and the onward traffic flows through the strategic network are acceptable in the view of the Highway Authority. The issue with BAR 09, whilst the land adjacent and it is being utilised for a footway cycleway, BAR 09 is part of obviously the current local plan and has been in its entirety implemented now. And at no point through BAR 09 or BAR 03 were specific financial contributions taken to deliver that link onto the A39. And the specific words used in the committee report for the Glenwood Farm report was that the kind of gifting, if you like, of the land at a nominal rate to the county council was seen as a planning gain itself, rather than being a planning obligation. There's a slight difference between what's planning gain and what's planning obligation. An obligation is something you're obliged to provide, which would suggest that the evidence that was presented as part of those applications that have been considered by the council and decisions have been made was that there was a clear material reason to depart from that policy wish list in BAR 09 that said this must be provided. It left an option for it to be provided in the future open, but they clearly demonstrated things of material weight that meant that needed to be provided. Similarly, we've also had an application on Old Biddyford Road in the last 12 or 18 months that's been decided, where again their transport assessment showed that the capacity of the network, and they don't just look at Old Biddyford Road, they look at the wider strategic network right down through single path, the A39, the A361, to show how those movements work, that also the capacity of the network could, was there for that development, and that didn't require them to need to come out through Glenwood Farm to bypass Old Biddyford Road. So I think we're in the danger of creating a scenario where we think something hasn't been done, but there's been previous applications considered where that material factor about whether or not that link was justified in planning terms was considered. An arrangement was made, particularly in that last application at Glenwood Farm, within the 106 agreement to future-proof that piece of land for a future link of some form to come forward. But that was as far as it needed to go. It didn't need to provide the link. And I think when you're looking at the wider strategic picture as we go forward into the local plan process in collaboration with the county council, they will look now at what you know, what the network looks like and where those bits of infrastructure would need to be provided. But the issue with the link onto the A39 is unless another chunk of residential development were for some reason to come in off of Old Biddyford Road, in addition to what we've already considered as a planning authority, that's the only door that's going to open to like maybe a financial contribution or a developer obligation to provide that link, unless the county has external highways funding to do so. But looking at this application on its own merits today, they've provided sufficient information to us to be able to determine that application on highway grounds.
Yeah, Tracy Blackmore, and then Paul Young.
Just following from Jenny's really, we are looking at this specific application, so any deferral, you have to be really clear on this application, what level of information you want to come back in 2 cycles. I'm not sure what you're asking for is related to this application. I think it's more about the wider master planning of Brownswell or Barnstable, which I get, I absolutely get. We should be, and hopefully in our new local plan, working much more with Devon County. Master planning is absolutely, I've been doing this a long time. That's how we should be doing. We should be involving everyone and we should be ensuring that we have that sense of place. Planning isn't perfect. We know that. We know we have housing numbers. We also have a planning inspectorate where if we are looking at highway objections because it doesn't relate to our policy, but actually technically it's okay and there's no objection from the highway engineer. We have been done for costs before on those reasons. And I don't want to go through that again, but we have to be really clear and sound on why we're wanting to defer this specific application. Absolutely, we should be master planning. Absolutely, we should be in an ideal world setting out the development plan. And that's where I definitely will see that development management should be much more included in that new local plan process, particularly Devon County, the NHS, everyone in terms of having that infrastructure. But I think that's a wider conversation. I don't think this is a conversation for this planning application, would be my view.
Paul Young, did you have something to add?
Thank you, Chair. I think, Councillor Levy, you're quite correct. I think what we find over time is that both the planning system works fundamentally very well, but also has its own kind of problems in terms of what it can deliver and what you can secure on a day-to-day basis. None of us knows what comes out of it as an application process in a future scenario. So all we can really consider is what's before us. And I see a lot of applications, of course, and you give an approval possibly, and then 2 or 3 years later, you get something else that comes along that fundamentally changes something. If I go back to the kind of period of time, 2010, 2012, when the Glenwood Farm kind of development was in the early stages, the purpose behind this land being secured for a possible road link was on the basis that at that time, there was a drive to try and secure a Bickington relief road. For whatever reasons, over time, there was very little public support for that. I think politically, the decision was made to remove that particular improvement out of the local plan process. So when your local plan was adopted in 2018, I don't believe that link was still taken forward as part of that process. So there was a lot of kind of statutory documentation where that scheme that had been identified was effectively removed. And like I say, the remaining kind of documentation where it kind of retained is within a transport infrastructure plan, but quite far down in the process. The fundamental point of the Section 106 agreement wasn't to deliver the road. It was to provide an option agreement that if the county council wanted to pursue the Bickington Link Road. Because there was no appetite to pursue that Bickington Link Road, effectively, now we have a scheme before us that looks to deliver obviously the footway cycleway as an alternative and as part of a scheme that we wouldn't have even considered 10 years ago. And looking at that both in isolation as part of kind of strategic picture, we would say that is acceptable. I think the key thing what this does deliver is that it provides kind of walking distances in the order of say 1.5 to 1.8 kilometres. Our walking distances we have to look at these days is in the order of 3 to 3.2 kilometres. So in terms of access to both say, the road of access to Sainsbury's or the new, that's opened on the Bicking Road. This is all within what would be described as suitable, safe and convenient, sustainable walking distances. But I recognise the point that, you know, in isolation, we don't want to be looking at schemes. We want to look at a broader picture, but planning is the process, of course, we go by. None of us know what kind of comes out of the woodwork. You know, in a few years' time, that may fundamentally change what we have before us. If an application came forward tomorrow, as Councillor Price kind of referred to, potentially additional housing requirements on land adjacent to this site, we would have to fundamentally review that junction arrangement that's before you today. And if it didn't kind of stack up, it didn't meet the appropriate test, then we would identify that as an issue as part of that planning process. If it was found to be acceptable, then that's fine. But at the moment, it's been tailored, it's been designed to accommodate the 450 dwelling scheme you have before you now.
Does that give you any comfort or any change in your position?
It absolutely does.
It's a system that we're in.
It absolutely does.
Yeah. Can you, because we can take a vote on whether that becomes a substantive motion, but before we do that, would you like to elaborate, as Tracy Blackman wants to, on the level of information that you're actually looking to achieve? Yeah, on for this application, obviously, yeah, relating to this.
So, it is of extreme concern to me that the report really clearly says that, and this is on page 61, that it really clearly says that the preferred option from Devon County Council was from a roundabout, and that from what I read and conversations I've had, the reason that what we've got in front of us is a T-junction without the possibility ever in the future of that having a fourth arm, having talked to the senior number 2 from, well, 1 down from the director of highways about this, that having a signalised junction does not allow any potential future for a fourth arm going north because of the delays that that would bring. So we're left in a situation where we have a T-junction which has been proposed by the developers through the developers transport assessment that effectively looks on this as sort of a bit of an island. What I am interested to understand fully is within that transport assessment, how the placing of this within the broader context, how that actually works. Has it looked at, I mean, well, what assumptions are in that report about future growth? We've already heard about planning application on Old Bideford Road later on. I mean, last year, 18 months or so. We've been talking, Councillor Price talked about master planning, talked about, you know, there's likely to be an extension. I'd like to understand the capacity of what's been put here. I would like us to delve into that a bit more in more detail to understand how this works in the round. Which is probably not specific enough for what you would like to write down in the minutes. So I'd be grateful for any help on that, but it is about, you know, this is understanding all of that report and the assumptions that are behind it, and whether it's made the assumption, for example, that those junctions onto the main road are going to be delivered or are not going to be delivered, or what assumptions are there about housing, likely growth in traffic generated? You know, does it take into account any of that stuff? I don't understand all of that.
I would have thought the transport assessment would have, and I confess I haven't read it all, has already made those assumptions, has it not?
I think that's what a transport assessment does very much. It kind of not only provides factual evidence in terms of things like traffic counts, but it also has to project kind of census data, except picture of what.
Your microphone keeps. Sorry. Well, to cut it short, is there anything that councillor Lever has requested there that you don't think is in the transport assessment?
No, I think that's, you know, it's a very comprehensive transport assessment as we would expect it to do so on this particular site. As I say, in terms of the factual evidence that's been provided.
Yeah. Microphone.
Potential growth. I don't think there's anything more that you could provide that would necessarily change what's before you and the conclusions that are being drawn to date. Because this is standard procedures that you would expect to find as part of a detailed transport assessment. The kind of traffic signalised approach is a software known as Linzig. Arcady is a program that they use to look at the roundabout design. This is all evidence that would suggest that some of the key junctions before you would operate satisfactorily. I know that's not necessarily something locally that people will be kind of happy to hear, but it's kind of within that parameter that we would find to be deemed acceptable for the purposes of planning. So I don't know what more you could deliver as part of a detailed transport assessment if you were to delay the process today. I'm not confident that we could ask for anything more that would show any kind of different conclusions that have already been reached.
So if I may, I come back to you and again to paragraph 6.7, where the report says that, you know, no details of information has been provided from Devon County Council about why the move from the preferred option of a roundabout to a signalised, other than it's been suggested by the developer.
Yeah,
Actually, it is a bit about what's in the transport plan, but I hear what you say, but actually it's about where is the county council highways department on this? Because, you know, we keep hearing from people about the difficulties on the highways network. We've heard that there's a plan, the local plan with BAR 09, so has got rid of the Tews Lane link politically, but actually it's kept in that road link onto the from Glenwood Farm. But then I'm hearing, well, maybe that wasn't necessary either, which leads me to a broader question, I guess, which is perhaps slightly a more esoteric question about how reliable are these plans? Can communities actually rely on actually getting the infrastructure developed and delivered that we need? Because of the impact on people's lives of it not being delivered is huge and ongoing.
But don't we see it all the time that we see an application that may be approved, may get built out, and then of course another application comes in a few years' time that nobody envisages at this time, that fundamentally changes the position, but you cannot necessarily foretest what's going to come forward at a future date. So we would, you know, that's the trouble with planning system, isn't it? In terms of how it operates, there's not a fixed master plan that can be rigidly adhered to, because it's open for anybody to put in an application to change arrangements at a future date.
So which surely goes back to the way in which the Highways Department looks at planning applications, when I kind of refer you to Larkbere, where we've had, you know, we've got an allocation there for 800 odd houses, and each of those little applications appears to be dealt with on a highways position in an individual way rather than from a broader way. We still haven't got the link, which is in the policies, which is in the transport infrastructure plan. So I do hear what you say, but what I'm actually hearing is that we can't rely on Devon County Council Highways to actually deliver any of the infrastructure that we need. That's what I'm hearing from you.
I don't know if some members will recall when we first looked at the Larkbere application before the planning committee, and I think we're talking about an outline application probably in excess of 8 years ago now. The outline was eventually withdrawn. And it's difficult because there were a number of kind of individual landowners who had interest in that. We did have a broad master plan for, say, the Larkbere. I know we lost track, but we had a broad master plan for that, which unfortunately was withdrawn. And I think a lot of the time, a lot of the applications we've dealt with recently is how fundamental a master plan is considered in the overall context of what you're looking to secure and where, and how you kind of stick to that master plan. We have difficulty, don't we, with some of the infrastructure provision, new accesses, new junctions that we envisage as part of a large planning application. But that, for whatever reasons, doesn't get delivered because we have to work to trigger points, we have to work to kind of limited contributions. And by the time those trigger points are reached, often those costs are double or triple, so realistically, they don't get delivered as kind of in a timely manner as they would have done historically. And so it's been that kind of change in process, of course, over a number of years, but you know, again, only what's before us. We do have, at this current time, a broad idea of what we want as a master plan and what we want to secure in the area. It's whether what changes over time, what planning applications that may come forward that none of us may not currently know about.
Okay, thank you. Let's try and draw that on to a close for the moment. Tracy Blackmore's got some.
Just coming back, not on this application, so on the Larkbeer application, there is section 106 funding for that A361 link. And we are actively seeking that with Devon County. We have many discussions with Fergus in terms of seeking that, and I know corporately we are also seeking that link, and we feel actually it would be really good for Barnstaple to have that link. So but that's not happening. That certainly we have taken a number of contributions for that. Obviously contributions have to be reasonable and necessary. I think in terms of the Glenwood Park one, just Jenny said, let me have a look at the planning committee report that actually, you know, it wasn't reasonable and necessary for that. There was a land option, but it wasn't considered reasonable for any section 106 funding to come for that A39 link. Because obviously there was a technical solution that it wasn't required. And again, it's all that reasonable and necessariness that we get tested on from the planning inspectorate, you know, going back to that. There is a reason why we do what we do. There is a wish list for the local plan, but there is also that technical standards, which is why we work with Paul in terms of understanding if there's a technical requirement for that.
Just for reference, it's easier to hit if you hold it a little bit further away rather than like this.
Let's move on. So look, I think we'll take a vote on whether that becomes a substantive motion. If it does, then we'll have to look at more clearly reasoning and get a legal view on that before we take the vote or something, but would be helpful. So unless anyone else has got anything to contribute on either of the amendment or the motion, there's no hands up. So we'll take a vote on whether a deferment for 2 cycles becomes the substantive motion. So all in favour of that amendment?
1, 2, 3, 4, Chair.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, Chair.
Okay, so that falls. So we're back to the officer's recommendation, moved by Councillor Prowse and seconded Leatherby by Councillor Leatherby. So unless anyone else has anything to add, we will take a vote on the recommendation to approve. So all in favour, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, Chair.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, Chair.
Abstentions? So that's carried, so the application is approved. And we will adjourn for a few moments.
So your case officer on leave, so you've got me doing this presentation. So it's application 81152, so it's removal of 3 antennae and removal of 3 mastheads with ancillary equipment, and then the installation of 3 additional antennae, 6 masthead antennae and further ancillary equipment at Green Lanes Shopping Centre. So just going on to the location plan, hopefully you'll all be familiar with the location of Green Lane Shopping Centre. The locations on the left there is obviously in the centre of Barnstaple. The location plan to the right is at a lower scale and shows the position of the replacement antennae and masthead amplifier in red. This is a Google Maps image of Green Lane Shopping Centre, and in particular the red rectangular is where the antennae is to be installed. So just moving on to some photos taken from Balport Street. So this one's taken from the northern end of the high street, which you can see the existing antennae in the photo. And again, the photo taken from Roll Street, which again, you can see those existing antennae on the Green Lane Shopping roof. So the existing northwest elevation, existing southwest elevation. So moving on to the proposal. So the application seeks detailed planning permission for the removal of free antennae and free masthead amplifiers of ancillary equipment. And it's requiring the installation of 3 new antennae and masthead amplifiers. So the proposed works are required to upgrade EE equipment and existing equipment at the site in terms of mobile network operators. So the proposed antennae will enable 5G coverage to the local area. So the benefits of 5G network will increase the mobile speeds as well as higher capacity, and increase flexibility, increase reliance on connection. There's some new steel brackets which will be required to support the new equipment, and they will be positioned high, particularly on that northwest elevation, measuring 20.2 metres. This then goes on to the proposed southwest elevation, which is very similar in terms of that 26 metre antennae, which already has one on it. So just going through the material considerations of the application. So the application is obviously with us because we own the site, otherwise it would be delegated. So the National Planning Policy Framework is clear in terms of high quality and advanced telecommunication infrastructure is essential for economic growth and social well-being. Planning policies and citizens should support the expansion of the electronic communications network, including next generation mobile technologies such as 5G. The design and heritage, we do recognise the site is within the conservation area. From further afield, the antennae you can see the antennae. I think there isn't getting away from that, and you can see from my photos. The proposed antennae are slightly larger, but will appear very similar in design. I know the case officer has gone back and asked if there could be more of a shared antennae in terms of a flag system. However, due to the weight, that isn't, unfortunately, that design isn't able to be considered safe. So it is needing for some separate structures. So on balance, it is considered the proposal would cause a degree of harm to Barnstaple Town Centre conservation area. However, the proposal provided a public benefit is such considered compliant with the NPPF, and it's considered to outweigh the harm. In terms of amenity, environmental health admin consortium have no objections. There's no flood risk and drainage issue, and there's no impact on highway or parking within the town centre. So the recommendation, Chair, is for approval.
Okay, thank you. There's no members registered to speak. Have we got any questions? Councillor Rutton.
I was just going to move it to a vote straight away. I think
You might have a couple of questions, but that's Councillor Knight. Have you got a question?
Yeah, simple question. I am aware that there's going to be some proposals for solar panels onto the Green Lanes site. I just wondered if this is any way it would adversely affect that.
No.
There's your answer. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we'll go back to you, Councillor Rutty. So you're moving the officer's recommendation, seconded by Councillor Leader. Councillor Walker. So all in favour?
I love Paul's comment, where she says that it will produce harm, but I'm sure your views outweigh mine.
Right, I'm going to hand over to your Vice Chair.
Keep it on out.
Thank you.
Application 81205.
We can't hear you unless you're talking to the mic.
Thank you very much.
Away from it.
Too close, sir.
You need to actually.
Not too close.
Have it-
Am I too close now?
You actually just talking to the way of talking. I hope it's been picking up. Is it
Okay.
open?
Is it working now?
It is, yeah.
Not too loud.
I mean, I only say this because, you know, I have significant hearing loss and it is really difficult. Either it's there and then it's just like someone shouting.
Yeah.
Or people have a microphone. And then they can. So actually using a microphone, it's, I mean, Tracy.
Can't hear you, sorry.
I am demonstrating the point.
Yeah, thank you. Anyway, application 81205, demolition of an existing building, construction of a new dwelling. Eaton Farm.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. As quite right, there's demolition of existing dwelling and construction of a new dwelling, including landscaping and associated parking. This is at Henton Farm. For those who don't know Henton Farm, we have Henton Hill running west to east or east to west down the bottom there. And it's access off that, the topography of the land, it drops down into the valley. The existing farm, you can see to the right there, with the proposal site outlined in red together with the access onto Henton Hill. I put in this Google Maps image so you can see Old Barnstable Road and Higher Park Road, isn't it, running to the top with the housing estate to the west there, with the site here, running off, say, Henton Hill. Existing and proposed site, the existing site here, you can see the existing dwelling. I'll go further into that in a second, and that proposed dwelling there to the right. This plan is very helpful. I'll explain in a second that in red, you can just about see it on your plans, but in red, if I get up here with the microphone, excuse me, the red, that is the existing, what's there now. The blue is what there is the stamp approval for a replacement dwelling, is in the red, which is, sorry, the blue, which is here, with a garage, and this shows what is proposed. This is the proposed floor plan. And the proposed elevations. So I guess, yeah, what we've got here as well, that's on the plan in the blue dotted outline on the plans, you can see superimposed what is extant. I think what's important to understand this application is what we're looking at here. Even though there's an existing dwelling on the site, we are looking at what we're comparing is what is extant. There's already a granted replacement dwelling on that site that could be developed at any time. Can you still hear me? Sorry, that's still working. Thank you. So what we're looking at is comparing what. No, I can't do anything about that. Apologise. So what we're looking at now is what is the difference between what is extant and what is proposed, whether it complies with the policies which I talked to you about. This is the plans and elevations, if you've seen on your reports of the approved dwelling. To the photographs, this is taken from Old Barnstable Road. Now, if you couldn't see those plans, you'll find this very difficult to see because it is so far in the distance. But Old Barnstable Road, if I go here, that is the existing dwelling just there. So this is looking from right across the valley at the application site. And this is taken from down lane, so a little bit further down. But again, you can see the application site is here. But the trees of this green is the farmstead at present. This is taken from a public footpath which runs near the housing estate in the valley to the west slightly. And again, you can just about make out the existing buildings across them. And this is taken from within the site. You can see the play equipment here is roughly where the dwelling is to go with Braunton beyond. And from within the site again. And this is the existing dwelling. So this is what is there at the moment. And again, this is taken from the Henton Hill, with the access to the highway looking down. So consideration of this, as I said, it's what we're looking at is the comparison between what is extant and what is proposed. Okay, the principal policy consideration is within the countryside, but within the principal policy consideration is policy DM26 for replacement dwellings in the countryside. So the policy gives weight to approving such, but the replacement dwelling has got to respect the character surrounding. There's got to be no more visually intrusive than that the existing dwelling. But in this case, what we're looking at, as I said, is a comparison between the extent and what's being proposed. And the new dwelling is going to offer a positive enhancement to the quality of design and or level of sustainability when compared to that being replaced. Okay, so that is the principal consideration of this application. So in looking at the first part, DM26A, whether it's visual intrusiveness, as you've seen in my report, I've compared the two, the extant and proposed. Now, the proposed dwelling, yes, it's slightly different. It's slightly taller at 0.6 metre taller. And it has a greater depth of 2.4 metres. However, the width will be reduced by approximately 6.5 metres. But due to its orientation, the landscape, go back. Due to its orientation in the landscape, the greater views of this property is from those longer viewpoints, from Down Lane and from the old Barnstaple Road across the valley. The reduction in the width of the property, even though there's a slight increase in height, makes it comparable, if not immensely different to what has been approved previously. The increase in the depth, the views from the west and the east are quite reduced in the greater landscape. So the impact on the landscape of the increase, the depth of the property is not significant. Following that assessment, it's the officer's opinion that the visual impact, there won't be any more visually intrusive than that has been approved. And turning to DM26B, so an enhancement to the quality and design and or level of sustainability compared to that being replaced. With regard to design, even though I've got no concerns with the one that's extant, the design is of a good design. It's well thought. There's nothing incoherent with the proposal within the setting, and I am going to compare it to that. The existing property is not a good standard, so it will be of a better sustainability, a more sustainable design. So with regard to the character, design, the appearance and the sustainability factors, it does comply with DM26B. So in total, this master's opinion that complies in principle with that policy. There are no other matters which will determine that opinion. Two conditions have been proposed with this. One condition that was with the extant scheme, that the existing dwelling, the one that's there now, has to be replaced. Has to be demolished and removed from the site within 3 months of first occupation. Also, the neighbouring site did approve still within the ownership, a smaller temporary building on the site. Now, I believe it's for a family member for the owners of the site. The idea is to bring the family in under one property. So that's why that condition is there as well, which does relate to the approval for that temporary permission. That once this property, if approved within 3 months, that temporary building also has to be removed, which does refer back to that condition of that other approval. So in total, funds officers recommend that this does comply with the local plan when read in its entirety. Recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I'd actually like to move, sorry,
Question.
questions. No, you comment on it.
I'll lean on that.
Board member.
Sorry.
Councillor Knight.
A bit rude, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit rude. I didn't mean to do that.
Questions?
Yeah, well, I know the property very well, yeah, indeed, and, you have to look at the existing dwelling to say, yeah, please get rid of it, and I like the condition as well for the family member to move into this property. It's a huge improvement. I'm saying that in the absence of the chair, you know, it's a huge improvement. Will have no visual impact. I'm quite happy with the PNG, recommendations, and as such, I will move approval if Helen would like to second it. And thank you, Steve, for a very good presentation. There you go. Something to say that. It's meaningful as well.
Thank you. Any other comments or anything? No? We have a vote. All those in favour?
Can we get them? No, it's like, it's like an issue.
He might now.
Yeah. I'll do that then. I'll move out of the way. Sorry.
You want to come up?
Oh. The miracle that we're.
So I can use a slideshow, so obviously you can use them or not, so just got the attention that we Google Maps and which if you wanna, or if you want me to go. Whatever.
Yeah.
Just like this.
Just say.
Yeah.
What?
For what? Why? So. Oh. Can we see the street?
Oh, okay. No, it's the same thing. In a different time. There are lots.
Yes.
Very
No, it's fine.
Oh, sure, it's okay.
Thank you, members. That brings us to item 9, the tree preservation order. So I will hand over to Andrew for a photo of a tree.
Yes, thank you. I'll start by giving you some background into why we put a provisional TPO on this tree. Initially, we had an inquiry from Highline whether there was a designation on the tree, and that was just answered just from desktop research and nothing more than that. And then sort of 5 months later, we started to get calls from residents in Braunton saying that this tree was going to be cut down and could we do something about it. They were made aware of this because road closure had been applied for. So we looked at the tree and thought it was worthy of retention and put a provisional tree preservation order on it. And then after that, it came to light that the neighbours were putting in a driveway and alterations to the entrance and the driveway, which would excavate into the root protection area of the tree, and that was why the tree was being felled. And it's worth pointing out that when they did the planning application, they actually ticked the box that said no trees will be removed for implementation. But anyway, that wasn't picked up by the case officer, and so we're in a bit of a spot because the planning permission would trump the TPO. So I met with the owners and the contractor, and we agreed to dig some exploration pits, some trial pits, just to see what the extent of the root volume was and where it was, and it quickly became apparent that the root volume was very deep because of the soil was very well drained, because it's quite sandy, and probably the soil level had been raised when the neighbouring bungalow had been built. They went ahead and put the driveway in. They did agree to reduce the parking spaces that went with it from 2 to 1. And in doing so, they actually didn't really damage any structural roots, or very few, and the amount of fibrous roots they would have impacted on was probably less than 20%, which is the acceptable in the British standard for development around trees of BS 5837. 20% is an acceptable loss of fibrous roots. So the implementation of putting in this drive hasn't, in my opinion, hasn't significantly impacted on the tree. So, which is why I'm supporting that we confirm this TPO. So if the TPO isn't confirmed, then it will lapse, and there's no doubt the tree will be cut down. So it's not just about creating a TPO, it's about saving the tree. So prior to creating the TPO, I was getting a lot of calls and emails to save the tree, but after I created the TPO, I did receive an awful lot of objections. Probably about 18 objections now, which were from the owners, from the near neighbours, from 2 councillors and the contractor. So I'll just show you the location of the tree, so you can see that there are a lot of dwellings around it. But all the objections all followed a similar theme. So rather than read out all the objections, I've just sort of summarised all the common points that were raised. So the first point everybody mentioned was the fact it's a non-native tree. It's a Monterey cypress. It is a non-native tree. But I don't consider that a justification for cutting it down. The council might have a policy for planting native trees, but that doesn't mean to cut down non-natives. And the reason why there are so many of these trees around coastal areas is because they are very robust, and they are very salt tolerant, and they have become part of the coastal landscape. So that's my response to that argument. People were concerned that it was dangerous. Well, 3 separate arboriculturists have looked at the tree and have all arrived at the same opinion that the tree isn't dangerous. I think people have a sort of falsely perceived risk of trees through not really understanding how trees work. So, I'm happy that the risk it poses is acceptable. And if it did become dangerous, the TPO wouldn't prevent the tree being removed or remedial work being done to make the tree safe. Another common objection was that the trees short-lived, 70 to 80 years. Well, that's simply not true. They can actually live up to 150 to 200 years. So I think that one can be dismissed. Another common objection was that they're prone to shedding limbs. Well, that is true with Monterey cypress, but Monterey cypress normally grow quite tall and open, and this one is actually quite compact and dense. So I think it's less likely to do that. And also its growing position is not likely to change because it's a tree on its own surrounded by buildings. So I don't consider the exposure is going to change significantly. And then root damage was the other common objection. Well, the root damage was minimal in the end, and as I've already said, the loss of fibrous roots was acceptable within the 20%. So in my opinion, we should approve confirming the TPO and keep the tree. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Have we got any questions? Councillor Coombs, Councillor Lane?
Not a question so much on this application, but when I was reading this, because obviously you've given us the explanation of what the objections were. In the future, could we have that on the report so that we can read that beforehand and so public know that if they look at that, it's definitely been addressed?
Yes.
I mean, I would say this is the first TPO application we've had and probably that you've done, so.
I think we take that as a positive criticism.
Yeah.
And just so the public are saying, well, actually, you've not addressed those things. If it's on there, then it's been addressed.
The reason why we brought it to committee was because of the level of objection, because normally we would do this and it would just be improved internally and we wouldn't do this, but it was just because of the level of objection.
The next time you can list those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Would you normally put a TPO type of tree?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So why are you doing it? Why is this the first thing? Okay. You mentioned 150 to 200 years, which is good.
Yeah.
But it's been there for how many years of this, over the age of this tree then?
It probably so it's about 60, 70 years old, probably. So it's not actually that old.
So why do you need to put a TPO on it now that it's been there for the last 60, 70 years? Or are you concerned that it may?
Because it had never been under threat. So that's the reason.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want me to come back on the planning application bit?
Yeah, presume the reason why it's a committee, so.
Well, so the reason for it's a committee, I think it's because there's quite a lot of objection, isn't there? So that's kind of about member scrutiny. So it's quite unusual in terms of the planning application. They did tick no to remove any trees, but this wasn't actually their tree. This was a neighbour tree. So it was quite a different. So I can see why they said no, because they weren't removing any trees. They were, I'm assuming, assisting with their neighbour with trying to remove the tree. I think in terms of learning curve, I think for case officers going out, even if it's not in their ownership, the tree, if there is a tree on the neighbouring boundary tree and consulting Andrew and making sure that we really think about roots of trees, I think is a learning curve we've had from this application. So it's not just trees on the land, it's also trees on neighbouring, adjoining land. So I think that's kind of how it came about, isn't it, really? Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Philip, are you moving the officer's recommendation?
I just wanted to ask a question, actually. Looking at the picture of the tree, I take it the prevailing wind comes from the left-hand side of that tree, because there appears to be a bit of damage to those branches and things.
Yes.
So going forward, you said the remedial work could be done on it, because if you take those off, obviously the tree will balance wrong, it will end up in the houses on the right-hand side. Who would be the person responsible for doing the remedial work?
Well, that would be up to the owner. So it would just be Yeah, but, your microphone. Was it? Is that better? Yeah. Yeah, that, well, that would be up to the owner, but it would be, they would have to put in planning permission to do any work to the tree, so whatever's done would be, it would be very clearly, specified what they intend to do. And it would have to be compliant with the British Standard for Tree Works, the BS 3998 as well. Yeah, so.
So if the neighbours the opposite side of the road, we've got a big concern, if those branches came off on the left-hand side, it would be unbalanced and could,
Well,
they
yes,
could be concerned it could tip over onto them, wouldn't they?
yes, well, that would be, you know, that would, if it came in as a planning application to do that, then that would be something that would be pointed out, and they would have to do balanced work and not just on one side. Yeah.
Councillor Knight?
I was going to move approval, so is that okay?
I think that's.
Well, in that case, Andrew, thank you very much, because I'd like that DPO to be confirmed for that tree, and so I'm responsible for doing that.
Ricky, second.
Oh, no. You've gone west.
Sorry, Councillor Maddox, I should have come to you earlier on. My apologies.
I think Ricky's getting above the stage.
Is that a question? Sorry. I did ask a question.
So, no, that's fine. If Councillor Maddox happy you've moved it, and Councillor Maddox seconded it. So, yeah, is there anything you wish to add?
No, I know the story of it. I know the story of it quite well, but I'm happy to help the tree.
Lovely. Thank you. So,
If it's foreign.
yeah, we'll take a vote on the officer's recommendation, the TPO. Oh, you got a question? Sorry.
No, because I thought we were finished questions, yeah. Oh, so can you do I thought we were actually going to.
I think we've moved to the vote now, unless it's. Sorry, I missed you. So I've got to do it tomorrow. All in favour? Oh, we're voting. Okay, we are voting. All in favour? That is everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great. Not sure whether we should do the 3 hours, because we started at 9:30. So we've just got the appeals report to go through, so hopefully. Please stick around. Yeah, the appeals report is rather positive, so I'll hand over to Tracy to run those videos.
Oh, you mentioned, yes, very well. Yeah, there is. Jack's built up in cement, sales and stuff. I see Jack next week. Let me know, speak about it. She mentioned stuff and after that, just on the just my words.
So there's a few of these, but I'm going to try and grab some food and quite quickly, because I know, I'm sure you want to leave. As much as you enjoy appeals, I'm sure. The first one is application 80918. So what it was an application for an extension to a dwelling at 17 Bundy Way, Croyd, and form a carport at the front elevation. So you can just see the photo of the bungalow, and then the proposed elevations on the right in terms of a carport kind of protruding out to the front elevation. So the application was refused due to it being not being considered to be appropriate and sympathetic, and would be out of respect for the street lines and not positive to the area in terms of the building line. And the appeal decision concluded it would have a harmful effect on the character and appearance of the area. You will all be very familiar with this one, so I don't necessarily want to go into detail on this one. This was the Ashford one that I'm sure you can remember coming through. So it was refused by members and officers' recommendation for refusal to not represent an appropriate location for new housing, not related to Welsh existing development, and it would harm the appearance, including the conservation area. So the planning inspectorate also agreed with that and concluded that it also not accord with the housing strategy, in regards to affordable housing and housing need, and there'll be conflict with ST 17 and DM 24. This one's an interesting one, and they do go either way. So this is an application for conversion of a barn to a dwelling. It was considered by the case officer that the structural survey wasn't detailed enough to really show how it's going to be converted, and that the existing barn was going to be retained. So it's the same as Hibbett case in terms of what you've got to remove in terms of it not being a conversion, it being a new build. So there were some issues about the rebuild, how much rebuild actually was needed as opposed to being converted. And there was also a refusal on the new door window opening not being complementary in terms of the architectural form. So the planning appeal, or planning inspector felt that it would go beyond the scope of reuse. They weren't so concerned about the design issues, but they didn't feel that it was the reuse of the barn, and that it did go above and beyond that external alterations, substantial rebuild. That's DM 27 for you. So this was an erection of an agricultural building at Springfield Farm in Chiddlehampton. The application was erection of a barn. So the barn was required to house young stock, basically, and occasionally be used for a TB isolation unit. The case officer felt there was insufficient information to justify the separation. So there was a farm holding 17 miles away. This was in a separate location, so the case officer couldn't understand why they needed a separate location for the livestock, and they felt there would be undue harm to the countryside location. So the inspector agreed that actually, particularly for young stock, it seemed weird why it wouldn't be near the main dwelling, and the location of 17 miles away from the main farm didn't seem a sustainable solution. This was for, so the appeal was dismissed, and ultimately, yeah, they have to put it right. So again, it's good in terms of that ending in terms of enforcement notices that it does take a little bit of time, but we do get the right, both times, the right result. That's a very snapshot of our appeals. They've all been dismissed, so it's quite a nice run to show that we are making the right decisions.
No questions? Any questions? Thank you very much for your